Dr. Kamalan Shah, who is a Vice Chairman, Board of Trustee of the Islamic University of Gaza. He is also the President of Hope Foundation for Education in Istanbul. Earlier, he was President of the Islamic University of Gaza and a lecturer at An-Najah National University in the West Bank. The title of his presentation is Academic Freedom Under Occupation and Aggression. Next to Dr. Kamalan is David Miller, who is a renowned sociologist and who has widely published on Islamophobia and propaganda. He is the co-founder of the non-profit company Public Interest Investigation. In 2021, Miller was sacked as a professor of political sociology from the University of Bristol, the UK. The sacking resulted from a censorship campaign by the UK's Israel lobby. This year, he won an employment tribunal against the university. The tribunal declared that he had been wrongly sacked and the university had sacked him for his anti-Zionist views. So many congratulations, David. And this is not simply an individual case. This is also a larger cause for all those who are engaged in the struggle for freedom and justice. The final panelist we have on my extreme left is Bardal Aral, who teaches at the Department of International Relations at Istanbul Medeniyat University. Having received his doctorate from the University of Glasgow, he has written 4 books in Turkish. Directly relevant to the theme of this symposium is his 2019 book titled Perpetual Betrayal, Palestinian Problem and International Law Under Imperialism's Shadow. And the title of his presentation would be, Are Progressive Scholars Really Part of the Solution in the Israeli-Palestinian Problem? Now, before I invite these distinguished speakers who have made contribution in their respective field, I just want to introduce the theme, or if you want to use the phrase, frame the topic. And I want to make 3 broad propositions. Next one. So, first, European ideas and practices of academic freedom are mostly ethnic, not universal. And this is because when Westerners think, speak, and act about academic freedom, they disregard diverse tradition of non-West and locate themselves exclusively in the Western tradition. In 1963, Fuchs wrote an article about academic freedom where he says that philosophy of intellectual freedom originated in Greece, rose again in Europe in the Renaissance, and came to maturity in the Age of Reason. The idea of the autonomy for scholars arose, he went on, in the universities of Europe. The linearity in Fuchs' scheme from ancient Greece via medieval Europe to modernity is obviously teleological, but fashioned only in the late 18th century, particularly by German scholars. This scheme is also exclusionary because those who engaged with the Greek philosophy were also Muslims who find no place in Fuchs' text. In this repetitive Plato to NATO-style narrative. The opposite of academic freedom is the church. First, the Roman Catholic Church, and later, the Protestant ones which succeeded. We thus enter the familiar ground of Christian secularism to which academic freedom is said to belong. I will come to the secular shortly. Let me note that Germany is regarded as the birthplace of the modern conception of academic freedom. Furthermore, academic freedom, in one rendition, it embodies Enlightenment commitment to the pursuit of knowledge. But as I argue in my book, Religion as Critique, practicing rank racism, both the German and the French Enlightenment depicted Islam as an enemy rather than as an agent of freedom. Fast forward, with the onset of the Cold War, the Christian democratic capitalist West was projected as the house of freedom and the communist bloc as its enemy. Karl Popper's book, The Open Society and Its Enemies, exemplifies this position as properties of an open society, free debate, and protection of freedom, according to Karl Popper, were available only in the capitalist bloc. After the Cold War and the ascendance of globalization, for the free democratic West, unfreedom existed either in East Europe or in the Muslim world. To Michael Ignatieff, an academic and a Canadian politician who became the rector of Central University of Europe, Budapest, teaching Weber and Durkheim, not Karl Marx, would spread the virtues of academic freedom. What Ignatieff doesn't say is this: both Durkheim and Weber, they were warrior scholars. During World War I, while Weber supported Germany for the cause of Kultur, that is culture, Durkheim backed France with equal vehemence to defend the cause of civilization. Along with China, Hungary, and Russia, Ignatieff names Turkey as a country where academic freedom is absolutely brutal. Lord David Willetts, ex-Minister of State for Universities in the UK, has similar views. But the question worth asking is, how is academic unfreedom in most Muslim states, which both Ignatieff and Willetts selectively talk about, related to the so-called freedom in the Western academy? More to the point, to what extent is there a genuine academic freedom in Europe and West? And for whom, how, and when it is mobilized or deactivated? The second point I want to make is that the West's ethnic concept of academic freedom, built as it is on a violent hierarchy of cultures and humans, is bound to promote silencing, cancellation, boycott of the freedom of those people who are deemed inferior and therefore less valuable. That is, freedom is often meant only for certain people who belong to a specific race, region, religion, nation, state, or class. Some weeks ago, Australia launched a policy named Australian Victim of Terrorism Overseas Payment to support its citizens, quote, impacted by the 7th October Hamas terrorist attack, end of quote. Under this scheme, Australian, most of them Jewish, will receive 75,000 Australian dollars in financial assistance. That the kin of 30,000 occupied Palestinians brutally killed by Israel in complicity with the Western powers are not even mentioned in Australia's policy shows how Australia, as compliant to Euro-America, embodies West's ethnic concept of freedom and humanity. Note that among the killed are over 12,000 children and women. Australia's national media, ABC, fired Lattouf, a journalist of Lebanese background, for her social media post which cited Human Rights Watch report that Israel was using starvation as a weapon of war in Gaza. Latuf was fired at the behest of a group called Lawyers for Israel, which put pressure on ABC to sack her. For Latuf, there was no freedom of speech. Let us note that Australia allows no criticism of Israel in public media. Now compare the firing of Latuf with the white Christian supremacy, which is often defended in the name of free speech. A professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania, Amy Wax, is on record to say that Anglo-Protestant culture is superior to other cultures. Likewise, Bruce Gilley of Portland State University justifies colonialism and highlights the virtue of the British Empire. In contrast, when academics criticize Israel for its apartheid and secular colonial war against the besieged Palestinians on the pretext of anti-Semitism, anti-terrorism, or something else, they are either cornered, silenced, sacked, or fired. The sacking of political theorist John Keane by Visions of Zentrum Berlin and of anthropologist Ghassan Hedge by Max Planck Society in Germany amply demonstrates it. So does the case of Professor Gay, the first black president of Harvard University. Also consider Mehdi Hasan, the famous American-British TV host, who was fired for his critical journalism on Israel. The examples of silencing, firing, and resignation I've given shows that on the Palestinian question, what exists is not freedom of speech, rather it is freedom from speech. And I want to stress this. On the question of Palestine, what exists is not freedom of speech, but freedom from speech. My final point is, the concept of academic freedom is highly secularist, missionary, and vicious for Western power elites as well as westernized intellectuals in non-West, as long as non-Europeans, especially Muslims, remain religious and do not convert to secularism, they cannot have freedom. Or as anthropologist Talal Asad piercingly observes, Muslims, according to Europeans, they are not fully human because they are not yet morally autonomous and politically disciplined. Edward Said, a committed advocate of the Palestinian cause, stood for the Western conception of secular freedom. According to Said, to exercise freedom is to be critical, and to be critical is to be secular. In 1996, he wrote, and I quote, "One of the great lessons of the critical spirit is that human life and history are secular," unquote. Really? What is the source of such a claim? Doesn't history tell us that the secular is also a weapon of modern power, the practices of which are soaked in blood the world over? My point is not to belittle Edward Said's advocacy for the Palestinian cause, nor to dismiss his scholarship. His criticism of nationalism is relevant and robust, as is his description of universities in the Arab world as extension of national security state. However, Said did not think about a polity that is alternative to the nation state. Historically, nation state or secularism is an import from Europe and political wing of modernity and enlightenment, which Edward Said was uncritically beholden to. So it is high time that the sovereign idea of freedom that Palestinians or people in the Arab world or beyond have was debated to imagine a new future. To disallow an alternative practice of freedom is itself tyranny and unfreedom. Unlike in Europe and Christianity, in Islam, the history of freedom is not juxtaposed to the church because Islam has no church in the first place. Notably, critique And freedom in Islam is not opposed to the divine. Rather, God himself is the agent of freedom, including intellectual freedom. Without going into details, I want to conclude by giving you an example of an intellectual from Islamic history who exercised freedom of thought. Imam Malik ibn Anas had the courage to declare that the coercive practice of extracting oath by the Caliph al-Mansur was wrong. Rather than bow to the power, Imam Malik enacted freedom of thought and spoke truth to power. As it is well known, for practicing freedom of thought, Imam Malik was publicly flogged, such that his arms were amputated from his shoulder. Now contrast Imam Malik's position with that of Germany's Jürgen Habermas on the ongoing genocidal war against Palestinians. Regarded as the most prominent living philosopher and a defender of modernity and universalism, in a statement, Habermas says that the current situation in Gaza is created by Hamas's atrocity, and Israel's retaliation against Hamas is justified. Disregarding global justice and worried only about Germany's international image, Habermas further says that Germany's democratic ethos rests on a political culture for which Jewish life and Israel's right to exist are central. While showing solidarity with Israel and Jews in Germany, Habermas says nothing about Israel's settler colonialism, let alone any word of solidarity for Palestinians. In contrast to Imam Malik, Habermas thus seems to me that he's quite busy in serving the raw interest of Germany and Israel as nation state, rather than follow intellect, truth, and justice. In pursuit of truth, while Imam Malik defied power and bravely faced the suffering inflicted on him as a leading agent of Western secular freedom and in defiance of truth and justice, Habermas comes close to worshipping the secular state power. So to conclude, what the world needs is not public intellectuals of truth-molesting consensus like Jürgen Habermas, but one with a conscience and courage like Imam Malik. So these are some 3 points. Now I want to invite our first panelist, Dr. Kamal, to give his thoughts about this highly important topic.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'd like first to thank Ibn Khaldun University, the organizing committee, and administration, staff, students, and all the guests here. And I appreciate their effort to raise more knowledge and more awareness about Palestine and about Gaza nowadays. My talk will be about academic freedom under Israel's occupation and aggression, with more emphasis on the, as a case study, the Islamic University of Gaza, which I have been president there for about 10 years, from year 2005 and year 2015. And I've been there while we noticed about 3 wars in year 2008, 2012, and 2014. So, in fact, to talk about academic freedom, we may, generally speaking, think of this in 2 levels. One is intellectual, which most of the time, most of the talk of our friend here is talking about intellectual side of academic freedom, and the physical side, also physical level. In brief, for about intellectual level, is not to have the right to research, publish freely, freedom to discuss controversial topics, the freedom to express one's opinions publicly without fear of retribution. This is in general. But about the physical side, which is challenges faced by academics and students regarding restricting movements, lack of resources, and threats to personal safety. And in fact, in the Palestinian context with Israel, in fact, maybe we have more emphasis on the physical side rather than the intellectual. We don't have the intellectual side because right from the beginning, the Israelis don't recognize the higher education institutions in Palestine, in West Bank and Gaza. They don't recognize them. And again, they don't have mechanism, in fact, to control them. But for the physical side, they have every means to control it. For restrictions of movement, we have a problem of restricting movement within the West Bank itself. And just to imagine this, for some time we have hundreds of checkpoints between the cities, villages, and the refugee camps in the West Bank. And again, have the same thing almost in Gaza Strip. And more, we don't have movement or free movement between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I myself worked before 40 years maybe, in the West Bank, and I was teaching in Al-Najah University in Nablus for about 10 years. But since 1995 till now, I couldn't go to the West Bank. And the movement is only available for maybe 1 or 2% of the population of Gazans to go to the West Bank. And we have as well, we don't have most of the time travel permit to travel abroad for academics or for students. So we don't have access to higher education institutions for students and for academics. We don't have ability to attend international conferences. And there is no way to engage with global academic communities and establish valuable collaboration. For me, myself, so many times I've been invited and make all arrangements to attend conferences or symposiums abroad, and finally I couldn't go out. Then we have lack of resources. Everything should come to West Bank or to Gaza should go through Israel ports. So we have so many restrictions that we don't have so many laboratories needed for education or for research. as well as IT equipment, computers, etc., which is needed mainly for engineering and science faculties. Next, we have threats to personal safety. Again, this is the same thing as a physical thing. We have detention, interrogation, torturing of students and academics. We have typically accusation of incitement charge. Anybody will talk about the Palestinian right to return, to struggle against Israel, then the charge is ready that you have incitement charge and you go to jail. And sometimes you go to jail without any charge, which is called administrative detention. And this, how you can just by law can be detained for 6 months, renewable. And some people have this have been in this cycle for about 10 or 15 times. Then the other side of non-free or non-academic free is the closure of universities. You have sometime partial, sometime complete, and we have the complete closure of all universities for 4 years, from 1987 to 1991. But by that time, there is no higher education institute open. So by that time, we were just teaching students in clubs, in mosques, anywhere else. But of course, it was not very effective. Again, we have demolition of the universities, and which happens from time to time. For the Islamic University was hit 3 times before, but anyway, we'll come to it. And then we have murdering of academics. And this is a sample of our colleagues, in fact, who've been killed in this war. Just to make some type of analogy of Maslow pyramid of needs and academic freedom pyramid in Gaza, where we have this physical side and intellectual, but again we have maybe sub-physical thing, which is the closure of universities and demolishing of universities, and then in fact killing academics, which I could say it is part could say call it ecocide. For Gaza Strip, and where Islamic University is there, in fact, it was under Israeli occupation since 1967, but we have 4 stages. From 1967 to 1994, we have direct military occupation. Then after Oslo Accord, we have partial military occupation. This is from 1994 to 2005, where Israeli forces completely go out of Gaza Strip, but still surrounding it with their troops and make siege around Gaza. Then we have from 2005 to 23 indirect occupation, as I said. Then we have this military invasion in the 23 and the 24. Anyway, I just skip this. Yeah, we began, in fact, in the Islamic University in 1978 with tents. And by the way, for people asking us that, oh, what will you do when after that your university was demolished? We said, okay, we began with tents, and we began again with tents as well, so long as we have, alhamdulillah, the will to do so. And we have tents, and there is no recognition of the university. Then we managed to have these huts, barracks, and even with this, humble barracks, it was, it was very difficult to have it because, we built the thing at night. Then Israeli forces come in the morning and knock it down. Then again, we rebuild it again, and then knock it down, etc., till they just get fed up, and then we continue to have these huts in year of 1980 and 81. Then we have a restriction in 1995 to 1995 to 2005, travel ban, etc. Then in year 2006, where we have election, and in this election, we have Hamas won the election in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank as well. So there was very strict blockade on Gaza, till even for food and very necessary things, we could hardly get them. In year 2008, we have 2 buildings have been completely destroyed. In 2014, the main administration building was bombed as well. And after 7th of October last year till now we have almost complete demolition. In fact, they attacked the university for 3 times in these 4 months. Three times. Now, what to do for our side? It is our duty, in fact, to have, to keep our staff available. We try to just to sustain them, and we have, alhamdulillah, the will and determination. Just once we have ceasefire, inshallah, we'll go ahead and try again to continue or resume our educational activities. In fact, it happened in year 2014, where we have a war. We have by that time 3 days truce, ceasefire for 3 days. And in these 3 days, we call our students and teach them in the university. So I think it is for our side, inshallah, there is no problem regarding this, but with the help of all friends all over the world, inshallah, we will rebuild the university, but we will not wait till to be rebuilt with tents, will have our activities, inshallah. For people outside here and everywhere else, we should join millions of people all over the world in their demand for calling for permanent ceasefire, and supporting South Africa in its lawsuit against Israel submitted to the International Court of Justice, and support the cases submitted or to be submitted to the International Criminal Court, inshallah. We call upon as well all academics, intellectuals, journalists, etc., to have public statements of solidarity with Palestine, condemnation of and critique of Israel, participation in protests, campaigns to pressure governments and institutions to take action, take part in increasing public awareness of edukcide. I think that this symposium is one event of this support of for boycott the BDS movement, boycott Israeli institutions and academics supporting the Israeli measures against Palestinian universities. And now we call upon ceasefire now, stop genocide, free Palestine. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kamalan. Now, the next panelist is David Miller, and the title of his presentation is The Zionist Assault on Academic Freedom and the Possibility of Science. David.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers and for everyone who's attending. So I want to talk about academic freedom in the sense which I think we should all understand it, and that is the possibility of doing science, of understanding the world and of explaining that. And of course, the Zionists oppose academic freedom because they oppose the expression and indeed any sign of the existence of Palestine and any criticism of the Zionist project. We see this most obviously in what we've just been hearing about, in the attack on all 11 universities in Gaza. The Islamic University of Gaza, as we've just been hearing, was bombed on the 10th and 11th of October last year by the Zionists, and it was later totally destroyed with a series of further strikes through until December. The occupation forces, of course, were not satisfied with the destruction of the buildings, and they went round to the house of the president and they executed him and all of his family. This is not an accident. These are targeted killings of academics, as we've been hearing, that just like there are targeted killings of rescue workers, of doctors, and indeed of teachers as well. Zionism must attempt to stifle academic freedom. Independent scientific research and social scientific research and humanities research will inevitably discover the fact of the Nakba, of the genocide committed by the Zionists in the creation of their state in 1948. And the Zionists cannot have that. They must extirpate and destroy all signs of the existence of Palestine. That is the logic of settler colonialism, and that's the logic of Zionism. So I think we need to understand that rather than just talk about the crimes that they've committed, understand what the context is. The context is that they want to destroy every single Palestinian and indeed the memory of Palestine, everything that could have testified to the existence of Palestine. That's why they destroy mosques and churches and museums and galleries and everywhere in which inheres the cultural and living memory of Palestine. That's what the Zionists want to do, and that's why we must oppose them. So they have this saying, don't they? The Zionists. The old will die, and the young will forget. And of course, both the old and the young might die, indeed, are dying, but none of us are ever going to forget what's been happening in Gaza in the last 4 months. And that is the problem that Zionism has. We will not forget that. No one will forget the genocide. And that means that in the end, Zionism is an unstable and temporary phenomenon. Zionism is on the way out of human history, and the question is only how quickly we can get to the end of the road when Zionism is a thing of the past. So I wanted to talk about the context of academic freedom outside Palestine as well. But I think you have to understand what it is that the Zionists want to do in order to understand academic freedom in the UK or the US or in Turkey. So the Zionists want to prohibit, to squash, to censor, to deny any criticism of the Zionist project, not just anti-Zionist criticisms. I was sacked for being an anti-Zionist, but you don't have to be an anti-Zionist to be attacked by the lobby. We have seen many, many cases over the last 20 or 30 years of academics who've been attacked. The most famous case, I suppose, starting off is the case of Norman Finkelstein in the US. And then, of course, there's the case of Stephen Salaita, the Palestinian American who was denied tenure and who now drives a school bus, is not an academic anymore. And of course, there have been long fought campaigns of bullying and intimidation against leading scholars such as Joseph Massad. We've seen, of course, in the last 4 months, the uptick in the attempts to intimidate the universities with the firing or the resignation, for example, of Claudine Gay at Harvard after some ludicrous allegations which wouldn't pass muster in any first-year kindergarten. And of course, also the case of Elizabeth McGill at Pennsylvania, who was forced out. Now, let's recall that my point that we don't have to be anti-Zionists for this to happen to us. Norman Finkelstein's not an anti-Zionist. He was targeted. Claudine Gay didn't even say anything remotely anti-Zionist. She said something which was interpreted by the Zionists as being not the same as their talking points. And for that, she was forced out of Harvard. They cannot tolerate any criticism, any deviation from the lines which they propose and which they intimidate the universities of the West to go along with. And they're very successful in their intimidation. But their success is reaching a peak and is about to be turned back. Now, in my own case, I was sacked for having anti-Zionist views. I was accused of anti-Semitism. I was investigated by the university 3 times, and on 3 occasions was found not to have said or done anything remotely anti-Semitic ever. Nevertheless, they decided that I had to be sacked because, as they said in a 53-page letter with which they sacked me, some students had been upset by the things that I had said. Some students had been upset by my anti-Zionist views. These were, of course, Zionist student groups as opposed to some students. And that was the reason they said they sacked me. I went to court, and that court judgment came out 2 weeks ago. And what was revealed in court was extraordinary. It was revealed in court that the university had not properly investigated me, they hadn't properly assessed whether to sack me, and most importantly, they hadn't actually sacked me for upsetting students. The reason they'd sacked me, as the university witnesses themselves admitted, was because of my anti-Zionist views. Anti-Zionist views were, to them, informed by a Zionist campaign, so repellent that anyone who says Zionism is racism must be sacked from their post. And that's what their view was, and that's what the court has declared was the reason that I was sacked. And of course, the principle that establishes in UK law is that anti-Zionist views are now protected in law as a philosophical belief. You cannot be discriminated against by being sacked for having anti-Zionist views. So we now have that as a protection for everyone who is in employment in the UK. And that's a principle which helps everybody in the UK in a job. But the more important point of the victory is, of course, that it drives a coach and horses through the main weapon that the Zionists have used around the world to try and beat down the pro-Palestine movement. And that weapon is, of course, the conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. According to the Israelis, according to their Global Forum for Combating Anti-Semitism, according to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition, itself an instrument of Israeli foreign policy. According to them, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are the same thing. Now, a court in England has ruled they're not the same thing. Anti-Zionism is anti-racism, it's not racism, it's not anti-Semitism. And so we have a means to push back against the overreach of the Zionists in their campaign to marginalize any criticism of the state of Israel as if it's anti-Semitism. Now, I wanted to go on to talk just in the last half of my talk about the tactics which they use. So, of course, the tactics which are used by, how long have I got?
7 minutes.
7. The tactics which are used by the Zionists are many and varied. So first of all, of course, there are student groups on campus. In the US, there is Hillel. In the UK, there's the Union of Jewish Students. Throughout the world, in about 40 different countries, there are Jewish student organizations which are all members of the World Union of Jewish Students, which is itself a member of the World Zionist Organization. These are Zionist organizations. These are not organizations for all Jews. They're only organizations for Zionist Jews. And these are organizations which are there to deny and destroy the possibility of pro-Palestine activism on campus. So they are anti-Arab, they're anti-Palestinian, and they're anti-Muslim. But we also have, of course, let's remember, the lobby groups on campus, the Israel on Campus Coalition, or various others whose names have now escaped me, who are there to intimidate students and there to try and radicalize Jewish students into believing in the genocidal ideology of Zionism. And that's one of their key purposes. So it's not just about squashing the pro-Palestine movement, it's about radicalizing the Jewish students themselves so that they become committed Zionists and committed warriors in the struggle against anti-Zionism. And that, of course, includes recruiting those students to go to Israel on trips. Sometimes they're recruited at the age of 6 and 7, sometimes at the age of 16 or 17. Around 50% of all British Jews at the age of 16 go on a free Israel trip with a Zionist organization. 50%. That's amazing. And this is about radicalizing them into believing in genocide, and not just believing in genocide, but doing genocide, because, of course, many of these students go on to join the IDF through the Lone Soldier program and to commit murder and genocide in Gaza. Many of them are now doing that. And South African citizens, US citizens, French and UK citizens are doing the same. So this is about radicalization and about squashing the pro-Palestine movement. There's a third element on campus, which is an organization called Chabad. Has anyone heard of that? Yeah. Now, Chabad Lubavitch is a worldwide Hasidic sect, which started off as an anti-Zionist organization, but which is now ultra-Zionist. It has branches in 100 countries, more than 1,000 in the US, more than 100 in the UK. There's one in this city. This is an organization which believes that non-Jews have animal souls. This is an organization which believes and wrote a book called The King's Torah, which justifies the killing of Palestinian babies on the grounds that they might grow up to challenge us in the future. An organization which is recruiting students across the US and recruiting people in this country, for example, to their extremist ideology. So there's a whole range of activities on campus which we should be aware of, that even before you start looking at the involvement of Zionists amongst the staff in universities in the UK and the US. In my university, 30 or 40 Zionist professors wrote to ask for me to be sacked on the grounds that they didn't like what I was teaching, which was essentially to say that Zionism is racism. So we have a whole range of different things to target and to fight back against and to understand. This is not a simple thing. So a simple thing as saying that the Israel lobby is involved. Yes, the Israel lobby is involved, but also the Zionist movement and also the penetration of Zionists across key areas of the power structure of Western nations in education, in finance, in journalism, etc. I'll come to the end now. So I wanted to say, in conclusion, we can point to the extremely well-funded and organized nature of Zionist involvement. Attacks on the universities, Zionist movement groups and individuals are exceedingly well-funded and integrated into the structure of academia. We already know that. This will continue to be a bulwark against the liberation of Palestine and a direct threat to Muslim, Arab, Palestinian, students and staff, as well as to anyone who opposes racism, including, of course, anti-Zionist Jews. As a result, it's necessary, I would argue, not just to dismantle Zionism in Palestine, but to dismantle Zionism all over the world. The whole of the Zionist movement needs to be demobilized and dismantled, because otherwise you will have the continuing ability to pursue genocide going forward into the future. So this would have the most significant effects in the 31 countries which have an organized Zionist movement. 16 of them are in Western Europe, 8 in Latin America, 2 in Australasia, 1 in Asia, 1 in Africa, 2 in Eastern Europe. But as a last point, I broaden the discussion of what needs to be a thinking through of what de-Zionization means to all of those countries outside of the countries that have an active Zionist movement. And that, of course, this is one of those countries. And so let's talk about Turkey and, of course, other similar countries as well. As I mentioned, there's a Chabad office in this country, in this city, in Istanbul. The rabbi who's in charge of that is also in charge of kosher certification throughout Turkey. And of course, let's remember that Israel there's a large market in Israel for Turkish-produced kosher food. There's also a large market in Israel for Turkish-produced steel and iron and oil. Yoav Gallant, the defense minister of Israel, cut off Gaza. He cut off the electricity, he cut off the fuel, he cut off the water. We should be doing the same to Israel. Turkey could be part of that process. But what I think people should be doing is thinking about how you de-Zionize in Turkey and how Turkey can help to isolate Israel so that it cannot crush the Palestinians any further. We don't just want a ceasefire, we want the end of Zionism, and every country around about Israel can help and do its bit to doing that. I would invite Turkey to join that process.
Now, the final panelist, Dr. Bardal Aral, please.
Thank you. Let me begin by thanking Ibn Khaldun University for organizing this international conference and inviting people with important ideas and critique of the Zionist state and its danger for the region and the world at large. I hope this conference will be an important contribution to the world struggle, international struggle against Zionist threats to the region and the world. My presentation is about progressive or pro-Palestinian scholars. I have some critique. I have made some criticism of this intellectual group of people whom I normally appreciate, and I think they have shown some courage in confronting Zionism and to expose the truth about this racist, expansionist, aggressive state. So, I mean, obviously, I am aware of their contribution to some of the issues that disclose the truth about Zionism. It's expansionism, that it's an aggressive state, it never wanted peace with its neighbors, that this state is not a helpless small state surrounded by the aggressive Arab states, but it's opposite. That it's actually an aggressive state that wants to expand all the time. These are ideas that should be appreciated, and I appreciate that. But there are some problems with the progressive approach, I have to say. Most of the scholars whom we categorize as progressive or pro-Palestinian, I think they have some problems in understanding the real issues and proposing solutions to the Palestinian problem. I think they have some significant limitations. So I want to focus in my speech on these limitations. I repeat, I appreciate these people. I appreciate their courage, bravery. I appreciate their intellectual attempts to understand the real problem behind Israel-Palestinian issues. But I think there are some fundamental problems about the majority of these people. So what are these problems? One of the problems I would like to point my finger at is the fact that they tend to disregard the illegal origins of the Israeli state. They don't discuss about Israel's foundation. They tend to focus on post-67 territories. So when we talk about Palestine being liberated, they are, and we are talking about the states in the post-67 territories. But the question is, what about Israel's origins? Should we not discuss about that? So I think, personally, there are fundamental problems of legality in terms of the foundation of Israel. One of them is that it's against the mandate system. The establishment of Israel is against the mandate system, because the mandate system is based on the idea that sovereignty in Palestine, as in the case of other Arab territories like Iraq and Syria, it belonged to the people. And at the time, in the 1920s, 1930s, and in the 1940s as well, the great majority of the people in Palestine were Arabs, mostly Muslims, but of course there were some Christians as well. So Palestinians were always a great majority in Palestine when the state of Israel was founded. So my point is that the mandate system was based on the idea that the majority of the people would establish an independent state. And that was the Palestinians, the Arabs, and they were majority. Even in 1947, when this infamous decision by the United Nations General Assembly was adopted, the famous partition decision, partition resolution 181, which was adopted in 26th of November, 1947. This resolution partitioned Palestine between Arabs and Jews. And the 56.5% was granted to the Jews, and 42% was granted to the Arabs. But even at the time, in spite of forcible migration to Palestine under the wings of the mandatory state, the British, in spite of that, even in 1947, 68% of the population were Arabs. So they gave actually only 43% of Palestine to the Palestinians. I also argued elsewhere that this partition plan was actually legally problematical. It's problematical because the United Nations General Assembly has no power to establish a state, and secondly, its resolutions are not binding. And besides, I also have written about that the United States, which became the protector of Israel after the British abandoned the region, actually the United States imposed enormous pressure on many states, threatened them, in order that they vote in favor of the partition plan. Among these states, we could mention Philippines, for instance, Liberia, Haiti, even I tell you the French. Actually, France was planning to abstain on this draft proposal, but the French were forced by the Americans. Truman himself contacted the French and asked them to vote in favor and pressurized them. Under international law, if a particular resolution, decision, or a treaty has been made as a result of threats or pressure, this is illegal under international law. It's illegal under international law. My problem with the progressive scholars is that they hardly discuss about these issues. They only focus on post-1967 problems. And we should not forget, again, the war, 1948-1949 war. During that war, the Israeli states actually occupied the 50% of that 43%. I mean, the territories apportioned for the Arabs, the Palestinians, half of it was actually occupied by the Israelis during that war. Have you ever seen these people discussing this? No. They hardly discuss about that. This is illegal. So even though I personally think that Resolution 181 is problematical in terms of international law, but even if we base ourselves on that resolution, we will see that during this war, 50% of the Palestinian territory was occupied by Israel. However, progressive scholars don't discuss about most of them. I don't say all of them, of course, but the bulk of the scholars, they don't discuss about that. After the Second World War, the new international law actually provided that no territorial gains could be made by force, military force. Actually, war was prohibited, by the way. So, although this was illegal, and most of the progressive scholars, most of them, they don't discuss about that. When they talk about Palestinian freedom, they talk about only post-1967 territories. So I actually have problems with this, and I am critical of that position. The second point that I want to make is that they tend to treat Israel as a normal state. Even progressive scholars, most of them, of course there are exceptions, but most of them, they tend to take Israel as a normal state. I would contend that Israel is not a normal state, has never been a normal state. First, we should not forget that it's a settler colonial state founded at a time when colonialism was actually thrown into the dustbin. All of these colonial territories, even in Africa in the 1970s, for instance, the Portuguese territories were among the last they gained independence. Colonialism was a matter before the Second World War. And yet, this Zionist state was established after the Second World War, 1948, as a colonial state. And Edward Said rightly draws on the fact that the Zionist movement never claimed to be a nationalist liberation movement. It always claimed to be part of colonialism, European colonialism. But they don't discuss about that. They treat Israel as a normal state. But it doesn't have borders. Israel never has borders. It doesn't have borders. Israel is a racist apartheid state. We have discussed about that, like the South Africa. Israel is an aggressive state. Israel has occupied the territories of neighboring Arab states. And it doesn't actually give up its occupation in these lands. It doesn't want to make peace. It continues to completely eliminate the Palestinians' existence in the occupied territories, in all the territories under Israeli occupation today. And it is also, I tell you, it's also a state that is the closest collaborator of the United States in the United Nations General Assembly. You know what? US and Israelis, you know how much their voting is common, similarity of voting, more than 90%. They are always against peace. They are always against a new international economic order. They are against disarmament. They are against economic rights. They are against every progressive project in the world together. And the Israelis are part of the dirty war that the Americans wage in different parts of the world. Coup d'etats, supporting terrorism or creating terrorist groups, undermining stability in other countries, launching some innocent operations. It's always the main partner of the United States, Israel. And yet we continue to treat Israel as a normal state. So I challenge the progressive scholars that they should not treat Israel as a normal state. As though, here I have the third point. The third point is that they take the Palestinian problem as a humanitarian problem or a conflict resolution. It is not a matter for international humanitarian law. It's not a matter for a part of the territory is occupied by another state. It's not as simple as that. So the problem is not confined to West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. The problem is deeper than that, and actually we should look at the context and history of Israel and its occupation and its colonial settler nature. We should not forget that. So these scholars, they tend to ignore about that. The solution then, the solution that they propose is always the same, two-state solution. But everyone knows, there's no two-state solution. It's impossible because there is hardly any possibility of establishing a continuous territorial state sustainable in West Bank, Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem, because it's full of illegal occupier settlements, full of security zones, special roads. It's Bantustan. It consists of different Bantustans. It's not the solution. I think the solution has to be more deeper. International society has to combat against this Zionist racist state together through sanctions, for instance, through pressure, through military enforcement action. But the progressive scholars mostly ignore about these issues. Another contention, which I would like to forward, is the fact that the Oslo peace process was romanticized by these people. These people mostly, as I said, there are always exceptions, but most of them were in favor of the Oslo formulation, which was asymmetrical, which was actually imposed on the Palestinians. and it did not regulate any of the substantive problems that the Palestinians faced. As you well know, the main problems faced by the Palestinians, they were postponed for 5 years. Issue about Jerusalem, Al-Quds, states of Al-Quds, illegal settlements, for instance, refugees, the security issues, final borders. They were not discussed at all. This was an asymmetrical and, in my opinion, unequal treaty. Under unequal treaty, actually, international institutions should actually interfere to prevent the making of such treaties because they are illegal under international law. Unequal treaties are reminders of colonialism, colonial pressure and capitulations, which was suffered by the Ottoman Empire as well. Unequal treaties are against international law. And yet, these progressive pro-Palestinian scholars, mostly, they romanticize about Oslo as if Oslo would deliver independence for the Palestinians. I tell you, in Oslo, there is no mention of a Palestinian state at all. It only talks about self-government, nothing else. So this is something that we have to challenge. And finally, I would like to also point the fact that progressive scholars, they, at least in the past, and I hope it's not changing, that they did not really call in the international institutions, United Nations and other international organizations to impose comprehensive sanctions against Israel. They always wanted Israel to correct itself, or the Americans would pressurize the Israelis. And everyone knows that it's not the solution because they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. We had to, I mean, the other states had to set in and actually to fight against this racist, aggressive, expansionist state. So the formulation should have been, in my opinion, the global sanctions and pressure against South Africa during the Cold War. That was the formulation. Unfortunately, many of these scholars, they did not have the will or desire, expectation to actually call in international society, especially Western governments in particular, to impose sanctions against Israel or, for instance, sending peacekeeping troops at least. But they didn't do it. Mostly they didn't do it. They continued to treat the problem as a local problem, as a problem that could be cured by some minor formulations. But we have seen that that's not the solution. And the question is, why are they like, if I am correct, I mean, if my observations are correct, then the question is, of course, why? Why are progressive scholars so timid about the Palestinian problem? I think one of the problems is the Zionist, the influence of Zionist lobbying. I mean, David mentioned about that. They are so influential. And many scholars, intellectuals, academics, they are fearful that they would be ostracized, as they did in the case of my friend David. So they are fearful that they would be ostracized by the Zionist lobby and the American government, of course, because the American government has always been supportive of the Zionist movement. Besides, they know that Israel is the sacred cow of the international system. I think the best example of the malaise in this international system is the existence of Israel as an aggressive, expansionist, racist state, and its impunity from any punishment. So they are aware of it. They don't want to confront Israel. Another problem, probably it's the peer group pressure, because in universities, Zionists are very effective. They are in key positions. Many presidents are Jew, or the supporters, financiers are Jew. So they are fearful to confront these interest groups, basically. And of course, there's also many scholars, Western scholars especially, they are very much impressed and almost obsessed by this power politics. They have internalized the domination of the West over the non-West. So they always think that the solution should come from the West, and that the West should always try to sort out the problem by peaceful means, whatever it means. So they have been extremely timid about their proposals for the liberation of Palestine, I think. So we have to point out that problem as well. Besides, I think we have to be critical of existing international law. I'm an international lawyer. And there are fundamental problems in international law. And one of the problems in international law is that international tends to define problems in the non-Western world in a particular way that does not threaten existing power balance, that does not threaten the superiority and domination of the Western states. That it should not challenge capitalism, it should not challenge imperial domination. So they actually, what they do is, they actually domesticate, all right, thank you, okay. They domesticate actually problems. They tame the problems. They don't want to understand the context, the background, and the wider economic, political, and historical conditions that actually create a particular problem. So they have this piecemeal approach, like journalists. They don't want to go to the past to understand the roots of the problem. So international law always tends to domesticate problems, especially when the problems concern a non-Western state caused by a Western state or its allies. That's another problem. So it tames the problem. For instance, to give you an example, they occupied, after September 11, Americans and its allies, they occupied Afghanistan, and they occupied Iraq, and they killed so many people, okay? They committed so many crimes. They are international criminals. But how did they justify it? A war against terror. If you use the language of international war against terror, if you use the terminology of international politics, it's liberal internationalism. Sorry, we have failed, but we were very well-moved, well-intentioned. People wanted to actually deal with democracy. The failure of liberal internationalism. The problem is that you committed so many crimes, you occupied their territory. You are criminals. But international law, unfortunately, is not really sufficiently capable of carrying this language of truth and justice about problems. So I think I have to finish here. But let me say that we should, as intellectuals and academics, we should not be part of the hegemony. As Gramsci said, we should avoid hegemony, and we should be free thinkers, and we should be moved by justice, and we should be moved by our support for victims of oppression and occupation. Thank you.
So I want to thank all the panelists for their deep, reflective observations on different dimensions of the subject, from a practitioner engaged in the building of the universities to a sociological take on the question of academic freedom. And then the final one from an international relation perspective and interrogating the so-called progressiveness of the progressive scholars on the question of Palestine. So now the floor is open for questions, observations, comments you have. There are volunteers here who will give you the microphone. So please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and be very precise in your question, and also specify to whom the question is directed. So this is time for you to be engaged in this highly important conversation on Palestine. Okay, can you give the phone here, lady in the first row?
Thank you. I'm a TRT World interview producer, Nur Hayat. I'm also a sociologist. I used to study gender. I just want to wonder that after this event in Twitter, such as genocide feminism, they invented these concepts. Why? Because it's a media, a global news media, looked at rather than Gazan women, looked at the female soldiers of Israel IDF, Israel army, as if they are very independent, how they contribute to war, presenting these female soldiers as if they are freedom fighters. Look at all these miserable Arab women and look at these free Israeli soldiers. So this Zionism is not only in the now there are many discourses. One of them is climate, other is migration, the other one is gender, homosexuality, etc. These are for them instrumentalizing these concepts. They are using everything, instrumentalizing feminism, instrumentalizing everything for their aim. So it's when I listen to you, because of Zionism, first speaker left his country. The other, David Miller, has been sacked his university because of their oppression, and they are fascists. They are actually. My professor Berdal Aral, also in international law field, he's also trying to say that how progressive scholars, under the pressure of the intellectual oppression of the intellectual academic circles, have been oppressed. So now the only free people, in reality, Gazan people. Gazan people now free, better than us. The only people now, because they are fighting, they are free to fight. Other people are thinking that, oh, I will fight with them, but I'm weak. I'm not ready to lose my job. I'm this and that. We are not free. We are not free. The only free population in the world now is Gazan people. I decided this and I wanted to share. I was hesitating, but all of a sudden they gave me the microphone. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution.
So it is more like a comment than a question, right? Yeah, to Heba.
Thank you very much for the speakers. I want to address a question to Professor Kamalein. I don't think that it's enough to keep working in the tents and keep the teaching going in such conditions, but there should be some way for other universities around the world also to help. And I think that there should be a platform where professors can volunteer to teach courses from all over, and these would be accredited by a cooperation with established universities worldwide that are willing to support. I think that this needs more work on it. And also the rebuilding, when you mentioned rebuilding, reconstruction of Gaza, inshallah, I think that there should be a new mindset for reconstruction in Gaza. It doesn't seem that Israel will stop being for some time a war machine. So I think that envisioning how to build also in the reconstruction, and this reconstruction would be based on a vision. How do we want our landscapes to look like, our buildings to look like, and how to protect them as much as we can against any future potential, probably possible attack. There should be some sort of thinking about how to deal with the land and the nomos of the earth, if I can call it so, like the title chosen by Carl Schmitt, how to deal with the land and its distribution and even the energy. It was mentioned in the morning that they cut off the fuel. So I think Gaza can depend on solar energy, and this should be adopted in the reconstruction, etc. So a new university, actually not rebuilding the same university, but reconstructing a new university. But Professor Miller, I wanted to ask you about the position of the academic circles in the UK regarding what happened to you. I mean, were there solidarity sort of statements? Did it really change something? Because usually, historically speaking, it starts with a person and then there is this snowball going on. Or is the control that strong in the UK universities? And where are the quote-unquote progressive professors and student movements, etc.? I mean, how can we build on what happened to you, and that sacrifice that you made can be fruitful and go on, even in small steps and baby steps, but it will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Heba. I appreciate your questions. Regarding help from others, and I think, alhamdulillah, we have so many friends all over the world. By the way, we have agreements and projects with more than 300 universities all over the world. And so many of them, in fact, they'd like to help. But you know, right now, we don't know exactly what the situation will be. But I think, you know, right now there are some forms of forums. They are already underway. One of them in Britain now, just 2 days back, British Council with some universities in Scotland. They are trying to do something, and they offer some some special scholarship for Gazans students. Here in Turkey, we maybe after 2 or 3 days we will meet the Higher Education Council, and we will discuss with him. I mean, the chairman. How could we? Could they help? Maybe in next month, I mean 6th of March, we have the Union of Arab Universities will be held in Baghdad, and we will discuss the same thing as well. So I think, alhamdulillah, we have so many people willing, in fact, to help. But right now, we just gather this information and try to see how the situation will be after, I mean, this ceasefire. Regarding the buildings and how to build it, in fact, with the horrible things we are facing, I don't think that it will be very difficult. You know, we have some of the holes which we saw Israel is doing more than 10 meters deep. They are doing so. But anyway, we'll try our best to you know, to accommodate ourselves with the circumstances we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Yes, so there was a lot of solidarity. If you go to the website supportmiller.org, you can see the people who supported me, letters signed by academics from all over the world, letters signed by Jewish people, letters signed by Muslims, etc., etc. So there was a huge amount of solidarity. At the same time, of course, there was a huge campaign to have me sacked. So there were many, many professors from around the world, Zionist professors who called for me to be sacked. More than 100 members of the House of Lords and the House of Commons in the UK called for me to be sacked. Not a single MP wrote to defend me, except for Chris Williamson, who I think by that stage was an ex-MP. So there was a division, of course. The strategy I adopted, and this kind of goes to the comment that was made as well, was what I would call a maximalist anti-Zionist strategy. I don't believe that you can debate and make things nice with the Zionists. When you're accused of being an anti-Semite, they're not interested in having a discussion about what word you used and how you could have used the word differently. They're not interested in having a sensible discussion about racism. They're not interested in talking about Zionism. So the only thing to do is to fight them. You have to oppose them. And that maximalist anti-Zionist approach that I took was successful in the end, yes, but it also meant that there were soft anti-Zionists who would have supported me, but who felt that they couldn't support me because I was too militant. So that's an interesting question. Of course, what happened was the kinds of arguments I was making were arguments which some people would recoil from. But then later on, when it became apparent to them that what I was saying was based on research, that it was true, that many of them came along. So this is about winning a battle, not just against the opponents, the Zionists, but with their own side. Some of the people you're talking about here, who only talk about the occupied territories or whatever, we have to bring some of them with us. They won't all come, but some of them will, and that's why we need to be maximalist. We need to be clear that we oppose Zionism, lock, stock, and barrel, all of it. In 67, yes. In 48, yes. In fact, in 1888, yes. Right? We opposed it then as well. And so that's the key thing is that in doing this, in fighting Zionism, we're acting as an example for rallying the troops and moving people's arguments forward, because that's what has to happen. We have to end Zionism. So now I've been talking in the last week about the concept of denazification, and 5 months ago, if you'd mentioned denazification in relation to the very idea of de-Zionization, that would have been it. Hands in the air. You can't say that kind of thing. But now people go, yeah, I can see that that's what you need to do. We need to not just to have Gallant and Netanyahu and Herzog and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich at The Hague. We need to de-Zionize millions and millions of colonists. All the ones who've joined the IDF, all the ones who've been in settler militias. That is practically the whole population. People who've been retired, perhaps not. Children, no. But the rest of them, all of them need to be de-Zionized, and that means a significant investment in deprogramming Zionism. It's going to be difficult to do. It was difficult to do after the end of the Second World War. The Soviets were the best at it, the British and the French the worst. But we can take examples from then, and that's the perspectives we face. How do we end Zionism? How do we de-Zionize the Zionists?
On my right, I think there are a lot of young minds, especially students from the universities. So, of course, everybody is entitled to ask questions. I would really appreciate if there are questions from the young budding minds on the right side or maybe at the back. So please feel free to raise your hand. You may have questions or comments. Please raise your, okay. Ramzan thinks that he's still young. Okay, please go ahead.
Thanks. What are you think about when Israel will stop? I want to ask this. What are you think about when Israel will stop?
When do you think Israel will stop?
So this question is directed to one person, or who are you asking this question to?
All of you.
Oh, the entire panel. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So let's collect a bit more, and then you can address Ramzan, and then Farouk.
I'm Ibrahim. I'm from Turkey. I'm a PhD student in Ibn Khaldun University in Medit. And actually, thank you so much for all those who made this conference available for us to just share our opinions with different people from around the world. So I've got an observation, might be let's say a comment on this issue, and then I'm going to come to my question. First of all, just a couple of years ago, when some young Muslim people living in Europe decided to join ISIS due to some ideological and religious reasons, what happened just when they wanted to come back, they were called astray. They called off the track. They even they depicted as a kind of terrorist by the Western media. But right now, what we see is that kind of the opposite of the picture. Lots of people from the Western world, especially young people, and they are paid, most of them by the Israel government. They are participating in this war, and they are just going to Israel and joining the war and doing lots of atrocities. And even they are publishing these pictures on the social media, but no one actually is talking about this issue, and all of them actually are silent. So when we just look at the international law that looks like applicable to all of citizens living around the world, it seems there is a problem. Because on the one side, when you have some people actually who are just doing something for a certain cause, they are labeled as a terrorist, maybe as astray. But on the other side, you see, and then the question maybe can go to to Bardal as well and Dr. Miller Aydin. But it looks like to me that we are talking about the international law, but when you come to the implication of it, it has a big, actually, question mark here. So are there international law that is applicable to all of us, or are there international law that is applicable only to those who are inferior than actually the rulers? Thank you so much.
Okay. Can you give the microphone to Professor Ramzan here?
Okay, Ramazan Aras from Sociology Department, Ibn Haldun University. Just a little bit follow up with what Ibrahim has said. Is there any medium of thinking about any applicability of international law since October 7? We had questions before as academics, as researchers, as students. We have been talking about hypocrisy in the Western politics. We talk about this for decades, but now I think there has been a rupture in October 7, and this is like before and after medium. So in this new era, I would say, what will be the role of academics within the academia? So I'm talking about the possibility of collaboration between academicians and university students in the larger context. What we have been observing in university campuses in different parts of the world, there is a huge voice of students, not only from university campuses, but also even from high schools, in spite of the fact that we haven't seen that much, that observation in Turkey, in our own country. So my question is about possibility of a certain form of unity between students and academics, and the possibility of transforming university campuses into a new climate under such circumstances that we today observing a division within the universities, a division within the politics, a division within the society, which will lead diverse other problems in the future. But for now, we need to think about a certain form of collaborations, global collaborations among academics with inclusion of students for further planning. What will be your projections on this issue? Thank you.
Can you give the microphone to Dr. Farouk?
Thank you very much, Farouk Yassishman from History Department. What I am going to say is complementary to what Ramazan Hoja just said. And what I understand from your presentations is that we may have reached an irreversible tipping point. That Israel has wonderfully proven that it nests no hope for coexistence, for peace, or for a future. And there is no end to its ever-expanding, expansionist greed. So, if this is the case, and while Bardal is rightly questioning the fundamentals of the existence of the Israeli state, and this was, to a degree, this could have been regarded as a marginal before October 7th to many, not to all. But now it is becoming questionable, and David Miller just said something on that line. Unthinkables, or people who do not have the courage to raise their voices, are now becoming thinkable. If this is the case, this means that we have reached a tipping point. And if this is the case, then my question would be, how do you think rather slowly moving international politics could readjust itself to this reality? Thank you.
Okay, so to be on time, I'm just exercising my discretionary power, and I want to start with Bardal. So can you please respond, and then we'll go to other panelists. Please keep in mind that we have to finish the session maximum in 10 minutes. So
10 minutes,
please take 3 minutes.
Okay.
Others can also have time.
First question, when will this war end? I have no idea, unfortunately. I mean, it probably, as it exists, everyone is expecting the United States to show its fist against the Zionists and to warn them that it cannot be sustainable, that they should stop. Everyone is expecting that. But obviously, the United States has no intention to do that. My expectation, it's hope. My hope, my expectation is that the Muslim states in the region, Turkey, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, maybe they could gather their forces and they could perhaps at least force humanitarian assistance to Gaza. That could be the start. And then there could be a threatening force against Israel. Maybe. That's my expectation. I'm not sure. If they have the guts to do it, I'll be very happy. The second question, is there, ISIS, the hypocrisy about the ISIS, all Western governments consider ISIS as a threat to international peace and security, as you well know. United Nations Security adopted many resolutions against ISIS, and they launched operations in Syria and Iraq against ISIS. And without the permission of Syria, by the way. Syria never permitted them, but they launched illegally operations in Syria as well. But with regard to the Israelis, the Western nationals who are Jews going to Israel and fighting for Israeli army, they are criminals. They are criminals. And they have to be tried in domestic court. Under international law, they must be tried in domestic court for being war criminals because they committed war crimes. Under international law, they could not excuse themselves by saying, we took orders from our superiors, so we had to obey the commands. It's not valid under international law. They should be accountable and they should be punished in their domestic courts. If that's not the case, I think it's also possible to submit the issue, for instance, to International Criminal Court. Criminal Court could be one of the courts that could be, I think, used for this purpose. So there are different alternatives. But no doubt, as regards your question, there is hypocrisy here. So we expect Western governments to treat them as criminals. These are criminals. And unfortunately, we have them in Turkey as well. These are two nations of Turkey, and they go to war in Israel and commit war crimes. They should be definitely tried and they should be punished. No doubt about that. These are war criminals. As regards the third question, how to transform the universities. I don't think it was directed towards myself, but since I am asked, I think it's important that from now on, the universities should also define themselves, I think, not only anti-racist, democratic, human rights, respect for the rights of the individual, but they should also define themselves as anti-Zionist as well. They should define themselves as anti-Zionist, that Zionism cannot enter the university. I think this should be a universal norm that we should all accept, because Zionism is an international crime, it's racist, and Zionism is a threat to international peace and security, like environment, like poverty, okay, and like illegal, drug smuggling. It's a universal problem. Zionism is a problem of the whole humanity. And we have to combat with Zionism as we did against South African apartheid. It's the same. It has to be eliminated as a threat. No doubt about that. It's not a normal entity. It's not a normal state. As regards Farooq's question, are we slowly moving into the international politics, adjusting itself to the threat of Zionism? I think we are. As David also said, now there are more people and other speakers. There are more people coming, in front and, submitting their critical views of Israel. Many people in the West, they have realized that Zionism is not a threat only to the Palestinians or the Arabs or the Muslims, but Zionism is a form of ideology and a mode of action that tries to seize everything, control everything, and tries to use every apparatus in a particular state to control the majority of the people and to ensure that they serve its own purposes. Its only agenda is to strengthen Israel, to continue its expansion and racism, to eliminate Palestinians, and to enhance its power in the world. Before 7th of October, many people would probably consider these as conspiracy theories, but they themselves have explained their expansionist aims from the Old Testament, that they want to actually occupy the whole region, from the Euphrates to the Nile. So, and also the way they treated people like David Miller, who's a great scholar, by sacking him from the university. And many people like him, many people from the media, ostracizing them, sacking people in the media and universities, in private companies. People have become aware that this Zionism is like a snake. It's actually trying to seize every bit of the power structures in the world, in the West in particular. So I think they have come to realize for human liberation, we must all combat against Zionism.
I'm going to try and cover most of the points. I very much agree with the point about Greater Israel. Of course, Israel, which I think many of us fail to recognize, is an imperial power. It's attempting to be an imperialist empire. It wants to build in Lebanon, in Syria, even it wants part of Turkey as part of its Greater Israel. It's an imperialist power, and that's why the extreme Zionists are saying, not only do we not want US aid, that we are opposed to US aid, that we'll do what we want regardless of what the US says. That's an indication of the thinking within a fraction of Zionism. Of course, the US there's an attempt to bring the US into the conflict. That's what all the stuff is about on the northern border, the 5-kilometer dead zone that the Israelis have drawn back from. They want to go in and take on Hezbollah. I think they know that they would lose without the US. But even if they have the US, it's not clear that they would win. And I wanted to say something about the great weakness, not just of Zionism, but of US imperialism. We're in a period where unipolarity is on the way out, multipolarity is on the way in, and even at the level of military struggle, the US is weak. It's so weak that it cannot even take on full frontally the impoverished nation of Yemen, cannot even attack Yemen in any full-throated military way because they're afraid that Yemen will sink their boats, which are now just targets, right? So the US is weak, and that's partly why it doesn't want to go in and be dragged in by Israel. So that speaks to the question of the ending of Zionism. It could come very, very soon. Inshallah, as I believe Muslims say, right? But so the last point I would make is this question of the tipping point. Yes, we're in the tipping point. Millions and millions of people see for the first time that this is a racist ideology, that it's a genocidal ideology. Always was, always will be, but millions of people see it for the first time, and that's not going away. That can't be put back in the box. People will not forget that, and that moves the whole of world society and international politics. But let me say a word about what is the moving force here. It's not just the millions of people who see the daily images of babies and children dragged from wreckage, lifeless or injured. It's not just that. It's the fact that actually, militarily, in the Gaza Strip, the resistance is winning. That's the most important driving force of the tipping force point here. The resistance is winning in Gaza. All of us have seen young men with sandals on, running up to Merkava tanks and depositing bombs on them. All of us have seen those films, those videos, haven't they? This is the fact that they cannot defeat Hamas. Hamas cannot be eliminated. They're never going to beat Hamas. And let's of course remember that when they say Hamas, what they mean is the entire Palestinian resistance. Yes, it's the Al-Quds brigades. Yes, it's the PFLP. Yes, it's the DFLP. All of the armed factions who are engaged on a daily basis in resistance against Israel. And let's of course remember also the other fronts in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and of course let's not forget the other country which has given the most support to the resistance for decades, and that is of course the Islamic Republic of Iran. These are the forces which are arraigned against the Israelis, and these are the forces which will defeat both Israel and indeed US imperialism. And as I said before, inshallah.
So we have already come to the time, but Dr. Kamalan, please.
1 minute maybe.
No, you can take 3 minutes.
Oh,
please.
yeah, okay. Thank you. As you know that we have, after Second World War, we have the world order, new world order by that time, and we have the Security Council with the 5 permanent members, where they have the big say about everything. But I think now with so many things are changing, maybe now 7th of October is hopefully to change the arena. And in fact, in between, it happens the besides the what is called Grade 7, we have the BRICS as well: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And after that, I think so many countries are joining. So I think, and again now with South Africa, have the lead, in fact, to go to ICG. I think it is a very brave initiative. I think that we can build on it, and now Brazil even have stepped that to cut the relation with Israel, maybe the first big country that doing so. So I think at the academic arena, we should have some type of initiative from one country, one academic community, and maybe it is better to be from the global south, as we see that South Africa and Brazil. Although that, in fact, we have very good atmosphere, maybe now in Ireland, in Belgium, in Norway, Spain. In fact, they are good countries regarding having to have the side of Palestine against the Israeli aggression. So I think that if we could have some type of initiative, and then build on this some type of academic alliance for academics and students to be as guardians to the international law, and to raise, for each case or each incident, they can have their voice to, to shed the light on it. And I hope that this will happen, and I hope that Turkey will have a say in this war, inshallah. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, before you go for tea and coffee, please give an applause of round for people for this panel and the wonderful presentation that they have made. Thank you. Babies don't have soul. Yeah.
alaikum. Your attention, please. Can I get your attention? So, I'm very pleased to welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, to our second panel for the day. It is, I mean, we have been really pleased to have the first panel on academic freedom. And I'm delighted to have an excellent lineup of speakers. We will have some real considerable brain power and academic prowess, but also decades of activism and struggle for social justice and peace in Palestine. I'm sure that in this session, we will have, we're gonna listen to perspectives that go far deeper than other conversations that we had about the root causes of the problem in Palestine. So as you know, the session is about critical perspectives on apartheid and Zionist occupation. And I'm pleased to introduce our lineup of speakers, starting with Dr. Hussam Zumlot. As you know, Dr. Hussam Zumlot is a Palestinian diplomat, academic and economist. He was appointed head of the Palestinian mission to the United Kingdom in October 2018. Prior to that, he also served as ambassador to the United States. His previous roles also include serving as ambassador at large for the Palestinian presidency and director of the Fatah Coordination Relation Commission. He also worked as an economist with the United Nations Special Coordinator's Office in Palestine. Dr. Zumlot is also a professor. He was a professor of public policy at Birzeit University. He held a number of teaching and research positions at Harvard University and University of London. His professional experience includes working as an economist at the United Nations and as an economic researcher with London School of Economics and the Palestine Policy Research Institute. I'm also pleased to introduce Miko Peled. Miko Peled is an author, a writer, and a speaker and human rights activist living in the United States. He has been one of the clearest voices calling for justice in Palestine and support for the BDS movement, as you know, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, and the creation of a single democracy with equal rights in all of Palestine. Miko is also a contributor to several online publications, such as the Mint Press, Electronic Intifada, Democracy Now!, Mondoweiss, and he also has his own blog, mikopeled.com, and produces the Miko Peled podcast, of which he dedicated his advocacy efforts for the creation of one democratic state with equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians. I'm also very delighted to introduce Jeff Halper, who is an anthropologist and author. He's the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions and a founding member of the One Democratic State campaign. With his PhD in anthropology, Jeff taught at Haifa and Ben Gurion universities in Israel and was the head of the Friends World College and International University program. Jeff is the recipient of several peace awards and was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize along with Palestinian Ghassan Andoni in 2006. He's the author of several excellent books, including most recently Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my first speaker. So the floor is your Ambassador.
Thank you very much all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Thank you for your very generous introduction, and it is indeed a great honor to be with you today, join you with this very distinguished panel and this very important symposium, the Palestine Symposium, and with very respected fellow speakers. Greetings to Mike and to Jeff and to all our friends there. And allow me to thank you and the faculty, the professors, the management, the team at the Ibn Khaldun University for putting together this vital and timely forum. And as you all know, and I've been following some of the previous speakers, the situation in Palestine is horrific in every sense. We are facing a genocide of our people. And I'm asked to speak primarily about the international angle, the international dimension. And we are truly faced with the reality of a world and a world order and global institutions that are structurally incapable of intervening in any meaningful and direct sense, however symbolically important they may be. Indeed, Palestine shines a light on the failures and shortcomings of the so-called post-World War II order. And it is my belief that what we are witnessing is an inflection point for the global order. It is the beginning of a process towards a multipolar world that must be managed carefully and definitely. And it is about adherence to a certain set of basic global humanitarian values, without which we will truly be staring into an abyss of our own making. These are absolutely critical times, my friend. Very critical, very serious times. And we must face them with open minds and intellectual courage. And that's why the importance and the relevance of your conversations and discussions today. Because what is happening in Palestine is a test of the moral underpinnings of the global system. It is a test of the very foundation of any such moral underpinning, namely the equal application of international law to all actors. And it is the very clearly unequal application of this law that is breaking a global order that has been under strain for decades. Everybody is watching this very unequal, selective application of law. If we are not careful, we will witness ever deeper divisions in a world in which no one has faith any longer in international instruments for avoiding conflicts, avoiding suffering, oppression, avoiding genocide. This is a very serious situation. This is a defining moment for all of us. It is a defining moment for each and every one of us. So, my friends, let me first give you a sense of how serious is the situation on the ground in Palestine. And I'm sure all of you know this, follow this, study this, and teach this. And of course, speak about this. And let me be clear, this is not just about Gaza, by the way. Though it is most urgently about Gaza, it is about all Palestine and all Palestinians, wherever we are. It is about all Turkish as well, and all Turkish people. It is about all of us, all of humanity. It is about each and every one of us in the region and globally. But let me start in Gaza. As you all know, 100,000 people have been killed, injured, and are missing, presumed buried under the rubble of their own homes. Of the nearly 30,000 confirmed killed, 12,000 are children. An estimated 70% of the victims are women and children. 1.7 million people, some 3/4 of the entire population in Gaza, have been displaced, most of them south to Rafah, city of my birth, by the way, on the borders, the very south of Gaza, on the borders with Egypt. Israel ordered their displacement, claiming they would go to safe zones, but nothing is safe in Gaza, as you all know, and Israel is now threatening a ground assault on Rafah, where 1.4 million out of Gaza's 2.3 million people are located. These 1.4 million people are facing the multiple threats of an Israeli ground operation into an area with a population density of around 16,000 people per square kilometer. 16,000 per square kilometer, and starvation and infectious diseases is spreading among the population in Rafah. The destruction wrought by the Israeli military has not only been comprehensive, it has clearly been aimed at rendering Gaza unlivable lifeless. And by the way, many are saying, oh, Israel doesn't have a plan. Israel lacks a military plan. They haven't achieved anything so far. Israel doesn't have a political plan. They're wrong. Israel has a plan, and they have executed their plan. And the plan is this: make Gaza unlivable, make Gaza lifeless, push people all the way to the south, prepare for the final push for a mass expulsion. This is the plan. It follows a blueprint. They know how to do it. They did it 76 years ago, and they are doing it the same way. So my distinguished guests and audience, the situation in the West Bank is completely at a tipping point. Tipping point. The Israeli military has launched a number of deadly incursions, killings, and there are hundreds in the West Bank, at least since October 7th, that have been killed by Israel. Thousands have been arrested. 7,000 have been arrested in the West Bank, all held in administrative detention without charge or trial. Armed by the government and under military protection, settlers, illegal colonial settlers, have gone on the rampages across the West Bank on a regular basis. 16 villages in the West Bank have been completely depopulated as a result. More than 1,000 people have been displaced. I'm talking about the West Bank, by the way. These numbers may pale in comparison to the horrors in Gaza, of course, but they point to the same motivation, the same plan, the same policies, and the same end game that Israel has for all of us, not just in Gaza. Israel is engaged in a genocide against the Palestinian people everywhere. And we must keep saying this. It's a genocide against the Palestinian people everywhere. Of course, it's most intense in Gaza, but it is genocide everywhere. It appears to be aiming, as senior Israeli officials have been clearly saying. This is not a secret. It's in the public record. At another round of massive ethnic cleansing of Palestine's indigenous people from their land. This is what they're saying. This is another round. And let us not forget that Israel was founded on ethnic cleansing. So they know how to do it. The 1947-49 Nakba resulted in the displacement of 2/3 of the Palestinian people, including my own parents, grandparents, family. And that's why I, among millions of Palestinians, I was born in a refugee camp in Rafah. They have never been allowed to return. We have never been allowed to return. And though the right of return of refugees is enshrined in international law, as you all know, Israel has never acknowledged that right for the Palestinian refugees. On the contrary, and that's what they are planning to do again. It created legislations, laws to legalize the theft of our properties, our homes, our farms, and the confiscation of these properties and lands as early as 1951. And it was then what they have done, as it was then, so it is now. It is now. So nothing is different. And make no mistake, my friends, Israel hasn't forcibly displaced nearly 2 million people south in order to keep them safe. They did not displace 2 million all the way to Rafah to keep these 2 million people safe. You are following. They are bombarded every day. Last night was a horrible night in Rafah. Hundreds were slain and slaughtered in Rafah. They did not push them south to keep them safe. It has done so in order, as some of the very senior politicians like Avi Dichter, a member of the Israeli Security Cabinet, stated as far back as November to implement a Gaza Nakba. That's what he said. And therefore, this is not a second Nakba only, according to the Israeli terminology. This is an ongoing Nakba. An ongoing Nakba for the last 76 years, unabated, unhinged. And we have plenty of examples of the genocidal language of Israeli leaders since October 7th, from the very top down, from Netanyahu and the president of Israel, down to members of the parliament, the Knesset, from generals to soldiers, and from journalists to talk shows hosts. And we follow some of the talk show hosts. Unbelievable what we hear. We have seen precisely what Israel has done on the ground. And all of you have seen that. Word and deed, by word and by deed, they did it, and they are doing it in front of the eyes of the world. So Israel has made the case easy for the International Court of Justice. And while the ICJ has ruled as plausible South Africa's meticulous case of genocide before them, allow me to cut a small corner here. This is genocide in word and deed. It is already a genocide. Regardless of what happens now, regardless of what happens later, what took place over the last 4.5 months is genocide. Tens of thousands dead, entire towns razed, millions displaced, and the very deliberate destruction of cultural, educational, health, and industrial and business establishment is meant, is deliberate, is targeted to make sure that people not only killed, but have nowhere to go. So you cannot go back because you have no homes to go back to. You have no schools to send your kids to. You have no hospitals to treat your ill to send to. So it's a very well crafted, implemented, executed plan. A complete annihilation of an entire society, an entire people, an entire nation. This is a genocide, the crime of all crimes in international law. And this is a genocide, the very crime that gave rise, genocide is the very crime that gave rise to the post-World War II global order. This is a genocide which the world collectively vowed back in the horrific aftermath of the Second World War must happen never again. We established the whole order on the premise of never again. And here we go. Here we are, yet again. So my friends, in spite of the overwhelming evidence, in spite of the fact that the entire world is watching this horror unfold live on your phones, your screens, your computers, in spite of the ICJ ruling, in spite of the repeated warnings of every human rights group, every medical rights group, every UN institution, Israel is continuing with its mass violence with impunity. Impunity. The world is not intervening so far in actual, tangible way. This is really a grotesque failure of global institutions. This is a grotesque moral failure of major Western countries. And it is a grotesque failure of humanity, I must admit. And let me be blunt here. The US administration could stop this tomorrow. Tomorrow. All it needs to do is end munitions, supplies, weapons, arms, and its financial support to Israel. Israel lives on these weapons, on these bombs provided by the US, on the financial help, not only to Israel, but to the Israeli colonial settlement expansion. It has the US has the domestic legal ability to do so, to stop. It has the international legal responsibility to do so. It has the moral duty to do so. That it doesn't makes the US administration complicit in the genocide against our people. It makes every single country, not just the US, every single country that has not clearly called for an immediate and permanent ceasefire and has not yet taken appropriate action, such as ending arms trade, complicit. But it also points to a fundamental flaw in the international system, my friends. It is up to the nature of the US Congress and administration rather than the overwhelming majority of the world's countries. We have allowed only a handful of US Congress people to overtake and overwhelm the majority of the world's countries, to put an end to a genocide. And you all have seen the US veto only a couple of days ago. That was the third, fourth, we even lost count of how many the US has used the veto power to obstruct international calls for an immediate permanent ceasefire. So the international system isn't working. It's not working. It is not an international system anymore. It isn't an international system. It is merely a structure that can be used and abused by the world's most powerful, countries at their behest, at their will. And it is therefore open to abuse by special interests, because it's not just countries now. It's a very special interest, small groups within these countries like the US. If those special interests can capture the mechanisms of power in a handful of powerful countries, we're done. We don't have an international system. If that is the case, what is the point? What is the point of international law? What kind of legal system is a system that is entirely at the mercy of individual politicians and their backers? And you all have followed the UK Parliament only a couple of days ago, 2 days ago. You all have seen what happened there. Politicians placing their own careers before their own responsibilities and the responsibility of their country in international law. Where is the blind justice in all this? Where is our commitment to equal justice, blind justice? Where is the equal application of law? This is what we agreed about. This was the international universal values. And by the way, people say these are Western values. No, those are universal values. The values of freedom, equity, the values of no war, the values of accountability is not just Western. Those are global values, human values. We all came together to establish these values. But these values have been chosen, cherry-picked by a few countries, applied only on enemies, on foes, but not on friends. So this week, for the third time, and now I remember it is the third time, in a fourth month, in 4 months, the US used the veto power in the UN Security Council to shield Israel, to enable Israel to continue the genocide we have described and you all talked about. It was the only country to vote. However, the US was the only country to vote against the ceasefire resolution. Even the UK abstained. And everyone else favored an immediate ceasefire in the Security Council. 13 votes with an immediate ceasefire. And earlier in December, 153 countries voted for an immediate ceasefire at the United Nations General Assembly. 153 countries. Just 10 of them voted against. And by the way, most of the 10 are small islands. This is not a narrow tally. The vast majority of the world is with an immediate ceasefire. This is not a controversial split decision. This is a clear case of a powerful minority holding back the will of the overwhelming majority of us, all of us, of the world, of 153 countries. Is this democracy? Is this responsible statecraft? Is this multilateralism and multilateral diplomacy we all agreed to be part of? All of that has been set aside, my friends, for the naked abuse of power. This is a naked abuse of power. This is an absolute travesty of justice. It makes an absolute mockery of the global rules-based order. And it is absolutely clear to everybody. Now it's clear, it's blunt. Nobody can argue. We have gotten used to powerful countries pursuing their own interests in multilateral settings and international institutions. This is not new. That is all part of the game of diplomacy nonetheless. But this is not a game. We're not talking about diplomatic games anymore. This is not a game. This is just genocide. This is a genocide. And if world institutions cannot act to prevent genocide, there is not point to world institutions. If you cannot prevent the very thing you were established to do, which is genocide, what is the point? This is the very serious conclusion we have reached. And I'm sure many people all over the world have reached. This is the very serious conclusion that every country in the world is reaching. And what then? This is the question. What then? What will happen when we strip any semblance of respect for international institutions away? What will happen in every corner of the world? What will happen tomorrow? Is the world willing to accept global tyranny by a few countries? Is that the best we can do? So my friends, we are a handful of countries. I'm asking, why are a handful of countries protecting Israel's colonialism? What is it? What is it? By the way, all this shielding, all this protecting in many small number of countries is not to Israel. They are shielding Israel's expansion, Israel colonialism, Israel's apartheid. Israel is the idea, and now you scholars and world scholars, among Israeli scholars, have proven beyond doubt that Israel is the idea that one group of people has an exclusive right to the land of Palestine over its indigenous population, the historic land of Palestine. Go read the Likud charter. Go see what the government, the foundation of the government coalition document. It says it from point one that this government is founded so Israel and the Jewish people have an exclusive right to self-determination in the entire area from the river to the sea. So this is settler colonial project. This is a settler colonial project that has become a most abhorrent reality that we had to be and live with as Palestinians. The most abhorrent reality. It has brought ethnic cleansing since its establishment, and even before, because it's bent on ethnic cleansing. It has brought military occupation. It has brought apartheid rule. It has now engaged in genocide. You see the consequences of the colonial project? How long are we going to stand aside and continue to allow this to happen? There are ways out, and there must be ways out of this. There is a global consensus around a way out, by the way. So people are asking, oh, this is complicated. It's not complicated. There is a consensus about the way out. Even the US, by the way, is on board of this consensus, with this global consensus. And the consensus goes like, we need to have Palestinian liberation. We need to have Palestinian state, independent and sovereign. Good, fine. But that consensus demands that the international agreed upon human rights principles are upheld and imposed when necessary. Accountability. That is the end of occupation, because how do you have a Palestinian state without ending Israel's occupation, dismantling all of the colonial settlements that has made the Palestinian land dotted with all these settlements? We need to end the oppression. The right of return needs to be respected. This is not just a collective right. It's an individual right for all of us. It's non-negotiable. And accountability for all. None of this is new to any of you. All of this has been exhaustively debated, and none of it can be avoided if we are to end an injustice that is threatening to upend the global order. We must act, my friends. We must act now, and we must act with urgency, because the situation is affecting all of us, not just Palestinians. And we must impress upon any and all interlocutors that justice in Palestine is ignored at everyone's peril, meaning that if it is ignored, justice for everyone else is ignored. And who's next? Who is next? And where is going to be the next war? And who is going to create new rules for this war? Will they follow Netanyahu? Will they follow the normalization of the mass murder of children? Will they follow the normalization of the mass destruction of homes, of hospitals, of schools, of universities? Israel has destroyed 75% of Gaza's schools. It has destroyed and bombed all of Gaza's universities. Will next war somewhere else follow the same rules? So this is very serious, and it concerns all of us, and us here in this room, academics, scholars, writers, journalists, rights activists, opinion shapers, intellectuals have a duty. We all have a duty to speak out, but also to change things. This is not just about us. This is not just about Palestine. This is not just about the Palestinian people. This is not even just about the global order. It's about our humanity in the end. It goes down to our humanity. This is about a common destiny. It's about a community of nations, all of us living with equal rights, protected equally, all of us under law, and in common cause to meet the grave challenges humanity already faces. From climate change, this is not the only challenge. We have many challenges, all of us. Climate change, the global poverty, the mass migration. There are problems that we can only successfully overcome together. These are problems that disproportionately affect the countries of the called global south. We are affected in the global south. And this is why the move from a unipolar Western dominated world to a multipolar world is so significant. It's timely, it's evolving, it's happening. And we need to think about it. We need to discuss it, and we need to act and push for it. But we must take on this challenge immediately. We haven't got much time. We haven't got much time because there is no international leadership. You must provide the alternative leadership, intellectual leadership, because, you know, we are in it together, all of us, and we must do so worry of the dangers should we fail to rise to this challenge. So, my friends, the sad truth is, even if we reach a ceasefire in Gaza tomorrow, even if we do tomorrow, the suffering will not end immediately. According to some projections, international projections, even if the guns fall silent tomorrow and we begin the massive aid project that is needed, we may still witness the death of more than 11,000 Palestinians, innocent people, due to the time it will take to deliver the necessary medicines and aid to all those in need. And the time it will take to improve or improve water, sanitation, and shelter conditions. People are dying of starvation, of hunger, of thirst, of communicative diseases. Should Israel's aggression continue, the number of slain could reach 100,000. Those who are killed directly, bombarded, and sniped. By the way, there are many accounts of children being sniped in the head. So it's not just bombarding people, it's sniping people all over the Gaza Strip now. And if nothing happens, another 50,000 people are likely to die due to malnutrition, due to the inability to tend to the wounded. You know, only 12 hospitals of Gaza's 36 hospitals are partially operating for minimal sort of basic services. And due to the infectious diseases, the truth is, my dear audience, the world has already failed our people in Gaza. The world has already failed. So we will not forget this, and we will not forgive. The world has failed us. The world has failed our people all over Palestine, not just in Gaza. And make no mistake, we will recover. We will. We will recover. We know how to recover. We've lived through it before, and look at us. We were not gone. We will rise again. We will rebuild Gaza. We will. And we will rebuild it as it was, beautiful and resilient. And we will build more hospitals, and we will build more universities, and we will build more schools. But will the world recover?
On this positive note, I would ask you to, you have 1 minute to conclude. Thank you.
I was concluding, my friend, by saying, will the world recover? That's the question. And how can we help the world to recover what has been happening? We have an opportunity now that we all recover and redeem from what has taken place over the last few months. And I think we need to focus on an immediate permanent ceasefire. We need to prepare yesterday a massive humanitarian and reconstruction program. We must focus on accountability, so we make sure that those who did these crimes are held accountable, so it's never again. So it's a deterrence. We must impose sanctions on illegality, arms trade, products of settlements, settlers, companies profiting in illegal settlements, citizens, dual citizens who are now committing genocide inside Gaza. There are a wide range of sanctions that the world must impose. And we must recognize the state of Palestine, because, you know, in real terms, recognition means the end of occupation. It's not just a nominal. So this is a moment when we bring ourselves together rather than apart. Pay heed. These days are defining. They are defining. So I think rather than waiting for politicians in Washington or London, let us define it together, my friends. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hussam, for this excellent intervention. You set the tone in terms of the international perspective and how the critical point we have reached with the onslaught on Gaza, and how the divisions in the world are still impeding the settlement of that situation over there. So thank you for this international perspective, and also a call to mobilize, a call to find solution, a call to address and reform the international order. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to my second speaker, Miko Peled. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting me to Istanbul once again to be in this great part of this great event. It's nice to see so many young people here. I think there are even 2 babies, if I'm not mistaken. So it's always nice to see young people participate, even very, very young. You know, I remember growing up, learning about the heroism of the partisans who fought against Nazis and fought fascism. And I remember hearing about all kinds of heroic names of groups and individuals who fought against apartheid, who fought against racism and institutionalized racism in the United States, great heroes who fought fascism and dictatorships around the world in general. But I've never heard that there is a need to condemn the resistance until it came to Palestinians. It wasn't until October the 7th or after October the 7th that this mantra has come up, at least as far as I could see, that we need to condemn people who rise against oppression, against apartheid, and against genocide. I've never heard this before. Suddenly we have to condemn first. We can call it apartheid, we can call it genocide, but God forbid that we do not first condemn the resistance. And the interesting thing is that this has been accepted. People accept this. Almost every interview, almost every statement begins with this mantra saying, first we have to condemn the Palestinians for resisting their own oppression. What kind of a crazy world is this? And why is this standard only applied to Palestinians? So if the standard is international law, as it should be, international law allows people who are oppressed, people who are occupied, to resist, including using arms. But once again, when it comes to Palestinians, there's always some kind of a special clause, a different standard. And so I want to invite everybody here to free themselves from their hypocrisy. And remember that when Palestinians, brave Palestinians, courageous Palestinians, came out on October the 7th from one of the poorest and most oppressed regions in the world, place where there's no access to medical care or clean water or proper nutrition, never mind being bombed and locked in like in a concentration camp. When they came out without tanks, without warplanes, without attack helicopters, without artillery, they came by foot, they came with gliders, and they came out with small, boats through the sea. They occupied almost half of Palestine. They occupied over 20 Israeli cities and towns in southern Palestine. And they completely paralyzed the entire state of Israel. The state of Israel, much of it is still in a state of paralysis. But for weeks, the state of Israel was in paralysis. They demonstrated once again that the might of the Israeli military is a myth, that the might of the Israeli intelligence apparatus is a myth. And I don't know for certain, but I can't imagine that the events of October the 7th, the fact that these events took place exactly 50 years and 1 day after a similar attack that again demonstrated the ineptness of the Israeli military and the Israeli intelligence services, and I'm talking about the 1973 October War. It can't be a coincidence that this was exactly, like I said, 50 years and 1 day after that attack. And what these show, along with several others, is that every time the state of Israel is challenged, it collapses, it folds. And I think there's an important lesson there. So I would say two things. Number one, rather than be obsessed with the need to condemn, I would invite people, first of all, to bow their heads to the courage and to the sacrifice that the Palestinian people have demonstrated, not for the first time, but certainly to a greater degree than anything perhaps we've seen in a very long time. And save the condemnation to where condemnation is due, condemning a genocide that's been going on for 75 years, condemning an apartheid regime that's been going on for 75 years, condemning a campaign of ethnic cleansing that's going on for 75 years, condemning the stealing of a land the destruction of monuments, and the erasure of a history of a nation and a country called Palestine. That is what needs to be condemned. That is where the condemnation needs to go. So I say it again, let's save the condemnation and point the condemnation where it's deserved, where it belongs. Condemning the Palestinians is wrong. It's misguided. Condemnation needs to go to the source of the violence, the source of the racism, and that's the state of Israel, the Zionist movement, and Zionists and supporters of Israel around the world. That's where the condemnation needs to go. And when we listen to the lists and lists and lists of crimes and lists and lists and lists of catastrophes that befallen the Palestinian people, I think it's important to remember that from an Israeli perspective, the disease, the famine, the destruction, the tens of thousands dead, the countless wounded, thousands of them children. For Israel, this is a list that they boast. Israelis see this as a list of accomplishments. That's how they view this. The more we put out these lists demonstrating the catastrophe, really the catastrophic effects of what has been going on, the more Israelis are pleased. Not only the Israeli government and Israeli military leaders, but Israelis in general are pleased. This is precisely why they were doing this. They don't believe that this is self-defense. Nobody does. Now, what was Israel's response to this total humiliation? To the fact, and I'll say this once again, that a small group of dedicated fighters from one of the poorest and most oppressed regions in the world was able to completely create dysfunction in the state of Israel and chaos in the state of Israel. What was the response? The response that any gangster, any bully would have. They look for the weakest victim and they unleash the worst revenge possible against the weakest, defenseless victims. And those victims are, of course, the people of the Gaza Strip. So I was asked today, once again, after many, many times, doesn't Israel have a right to defend itself? First of all, the notion that a nation that has never possessed a military force, never had an army, poses some kind of a threat to a nation that is basically built on an army, a massive, well-funded, well-equipped army, and that there's somehow a justification for self-defense. The actual notion of this is absolutely absurd. Now, Israel has a responsibility to defend all the people that it governs. Israel has a responsibility to defend the Palestinian people, to care for the Palestinian people. Yes, they are occupied against their will. But Palestinians have been living under a reign of terror for 75 years. Israel has never met its obligation to the Palestinian people. As the governing state, as the governing power, their job is to protect and care for all the people that they govern. So rather than talk about this nonsense of self-defense, we need to talk about the responsibilities. And not only did they not meet these responsibilities, they have been engaged in slaughter, in abuse, in oppression, and inflicting and creating a reign of terror under which Palestinians have to live every single day. Palestinians in the Naqab, Palestinians in Jerusalem, in Lid, in Ramle, in Jaffa, in Haifa, in Hebron. My friend Issa Amra, who many of you I'm sure know, one of the most important activists operating today in Palestine, targeted by the army, targeted by settlers, targeted by settlers who dress like the army, targeted by the Palestinian Authority and its intelligence services. And he's not the only one. He's just one example that people know about because he's well known. And still he operates. So once again, this excuse that somehow Israel is defending itself against Palestinian terrorism and all this nonsense. First of all, there's no such thing as Palestinian terrorism. But beyond that, this nonsense of an argument that Israel is somehow defending itself falls flat, does not hold water. It's one more in a long list of lies that for reasons beyond understanding, the world is accepting. For reasons beyond understanding, people continue to repeat and repeat and repeat. So what do people come up with? What is the solution that people come up with? Of course, the two-state solution. The two-state solution. Can anybody explain to me what are the virtues of a two-state solution? Who does it serve? What are the virtues? And then how exactly is it going to be implemented? The two-state solution is mentioned only by people who are either ignorant, and there are many of those, or people who refuse to tell the truth. Those are the only two situations that the two-state solution is brought up. And I've seen both. I've seen people who are genuinely ignorant and say, well, what about the two-state solution? So let's leave for aside for a moment the fact that I can't see any, I don't believe there are any virtues to the two-state solution. Why should Palestinians ever agree to such a ridiculous solution is beyond me. We have to come to terms with the fact that Palestine is a single state. All of Palestine has been a single state, and that is irreversible. Now, there is this notion that peace, which sounds like an absurd idea these days, but let's bring it back to the table for a moment, that peace needs to be achieved between Israel and the Palestinians. So I'm sure, at least I hope, that everybody or most people in this room have heard of the great Palestinian writer Ghassan Kanafani. Yes, I see people nodding their heads. There's a wonderful interview with Ghassan Kanafani that's going around on the internet, where he's asked, this is before Israel assassinated him, yes, one of the greatest writers. If you haven't read Ghassan Kanafani, leave whatever you're reading and find Ghassan Kanafani and read Ghassan Kanafani. Read The Return to Haifa first. So he's asked, why not negotiate and make peace with Israel? And after this question is asked, Ghassan Kanafani pauses for a moment. And he looks at this reporter and he says, you don't mean exactly peace. You mean capitulation. Negotiating with Israel is capitulation. So then the journalist kind of pushes on this a little more, and he says, but why not negotiate? And he says, this will be a very strange, Ghassan Kanafani says, this will be a very strange kind of negotiation, like the negotiation between the sword and the neck. I think we need to take these words. First of all, everything he said was proven to be true. But let's take that and expand on it a little bit. Let's expand on this a little bit. Trying to appease Israel, maintaining diplomatic relations with Israel, allowing Israel to participate in the Olympics, allowing Israel to participate in FIFA and all other international arenas is a capitulation of all of us. Of all of us. A capitulation to a racist, genocidal regime. Anything less than a demand to close down embassies, impose immediate sanctions, impose a no-fly zone over Gaza, a complete arms embargo on weapons and ammunition sold to Israel. Anything less than that should be uneven believable, unspeakable, shouldn't be allowed to be raised on the, put on the table. A ceasefire is a response to a genocide? A ceasefire is a response to a genocide? Since when? So we need to take this to heart. We need to push our governments, regardless of what countries we've come from. We need to demand, not ask, not beg, demand that our governments close down Israeli embassies, kick out the ambassadors, impose sanctions, and end all trade with the apartheid state until such time that it collapses and gives the opportunity for a real free democratic Palestine from the river to the sea to emerge with equal rights, because that is the only recipe for peace. It's the only option for peace between the people who live in historic Palestine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miko, for this really enlightening insights, and also it's a fresh breeze of air in a discourse that has been polluted for so long by euphemisms and double talk, double speak. Thank you for sharing this and for the clarity. I would also encourage especially the younger people present here to read more about Miko Pelled's own journey. He has a book called The General's Son, because he's a son of a general. He is part of a long dynasty of military people in Israel, but he has seen the light. He has seen, what's happening. And I encourage you to read this book, because there is a Turkish version that has been produced, I think, about a year ago. Thank you, Miko. And we'll come back with more questions. Please prepare your questions. And last but not least, we have with us Jeff Halper. Please, the floor is yours.
I'm going to stand up. I like to present in motion. I want to thank Ibn Khaldun University for inviting me and initiating this symposium. I also want to acknowledge, before I begin, because I'm not going to speak to it directly, the genocide that's going on in Gaza, and the political, but also the solidarity we all hold for the Palestinians in Gaza and in the rest of Palestine, of course. There's a rage that we all feel, and a sorrow, and everything that goes on inside ourselves when we confront genocide. But at the same time, this conference, as was emphasized at the very beginning, has to do with the future. In other words, we can't ignore and we can't just pass by what's happening, but at the same time, we have to keep our eyes on the future. And here you get into a real dissonance. It's a real problem because, activism, what I do during most of my working days, is a direct expression of the rage. You're out, you're resisting house demolitions, you're fighting the Israeli army, you're with Palestinians in solidarity, and so on. But at the same time, when you're thinking about a political program, and you cannot be in a political struggle without a political program, as you're formulating that, and as you're thinking of the future, that's a very cold, calculated process. In other words, in a way, you don't set the rage aside, as Frantz Fanon taught us. You don't set it aside, but you channel it. And the final result of the rage has to be some kind of resolution in a just way. And that's the spirit in which I want to present what I'm going to say today, because it's very unemotional in many ways. It's very intellectual. People might say, wait, why are we talking about this stuff in the middle of a genocide? But that's precisely the point. The way to move beyond genocide, beyond colonialism, beyond apartheid, beyond occupation, beyond oppression, is to finally resolve politically these kinds of issues. So we condemn all that is taken for granted, but at the same time we go on, and that's what I want to try to do today, only in a few minutes. So it's just a very quick presentation. But I'm the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, ICAD. But our organization is also a part of an organization led by Palestinians called the One Democratic State Campaign. And over the last few years, we've really been sitting down and trying to formulate a political program that we can move forward. I want to talk about that tonight. Of course, I'm not a Palestinian, so I'm not representing the Palestinian voice. I am speaking from within this One Democratic State group, which is Palestinians and anti-Zionist Israelis. So from that point of view, I am speaking from inside the group. But of course, a lot of my analysis is coming from a critical Israeli point of view. So don't take what I'm saying as representing Palestinians in any way. In fact, we're really involved in a struggle that has 5 facets. And, one of the questions that can be asked, that I'm often asked, is what role does an Israeli have to play at all in the Palestinian struggle for liberation? But if we look at this in terms of the future, we're involved in 5 different kinds of struggles. First of all, resistance. Resistance to occupation, resistance to colonialism, resistance to the oppression of Israel. That's clear. But that's a joint struggle. I mean, Miko is here, who's an Israeli. I'm here as an Israeli. That's a joint struggle to resist occupation. And as we look at this as an anti-colonial struggle, because it is an anti-colonial struggle, everyone that's opposed and fighting colonialism is on the same side. So as Miko says, it doesn't break down Israelis are here and Palestinians are there, where it's a joint struggle against colonialism. That's the first struggle that we're in. The second facet is decolonization. Going beyond resistance, how do we decolonize a settler colonial entity like Zionism and like Israel, which is also a joint struggle? How do we dismantle the structures of control and domination so that we can prepare the ground for building something new and just and equal? The third facet of the struggle is Palestinian liberation itself. What do the Palestinians need? What rights do they want? Do they demand? What does liberation mean for Palestinians? And this is a part of the struggle, of course, that's Palestinian. I have nothing to do with that whatsoever. This is an internal Palestinian discussion of deciding what does liberation mean for us Palestinians. And it involves some difficult decisions as well, because as we'll see in a minute, Palestine is not going to revert to what it was in 1948 or what it was in 1918. There's a settler colonial reality that's going to remain, a legacy. And how do Palestinians reconcile their just and moral demands for liberation with the realities on the ground, national, demographic, the legacies of settler colonialism. We'll come to that in a minute, but those are Palestinian decisions. The fourth facet of the struggle is now to move on and build a just and inclusive polity, a new state, since we need a state in the meantime, and society, which again is a joint project. I mean, no matter what happens, 40%, half of the population of this country, of Palestine, is going to be Israeli Jews. And so, again, it's a joint project of how do we build something just and inclusive. And finally, we talk about national rights, we talk about states, but in fact, most of us, I hope, don't like nationalism. Nationalism is not exactly a positive force in the world. And in fact, it's a European generated force, nationalism. So I would hope we go beyond national identities. And we don't like states. I certainly don't like states. States are another European imposition that if any part of the world has suffered from states, it's the Middle East that generate all these conflicts. We can't have genuine liberation of any peoples within those European constraints. You cannot have Palestinian liberation, to be specific, within a European state in which you're locked in with Israelis and national identities continue to compete and conflict with each other. We have to think of something new. And here, I'll talk about it in 1 second. In fact, if we're looking for an indigenous model of how we can restructure our world, and the subtext of this conference and the title is towards a global struggle or a new global order, so that there is a global aspect to the Palestinian struggle, and that is, what does liberation genuinely mean? And a lot of us are looking to the Ottoman Empire. I mean, I know you've probably had discussions here. I'm not telling you anything new, but for many of us outside, the Ottoman Empire, for many people, even in Palestine or whatever, is kind of a dead letter. I mean, nobody thinks about it. It's sort of a historical thing. Nobody puts it in the political equation. But through our discussions, as we're trying to envision a new regional order or a new global order that would genuinely liberate Palestinians and everyone, in a sense, that goes beyond nationalism and states, the Ottoman Empire comes out as not a bad regional model. We have to update it, maybe rename it. But I think we have to go beyond national liberation in a more regional and global sense in order to genuinely create social orders that allow our peoples to be liberated. So these are the 5 struggles, 4 of which are joint. Matter of fact, the last one is all of us together in our region. And so, I think that looking at it from that way, we have to look at how do we progress from one kind of a struggle to the next. All right, I'm not going to get it. We all know that Zionism is settler colonialism, and that has a certain logic to it that we'll come back to. So the first task of it's interesting, settler colonialism has become a very common term, which should be a good thing. Everybody talks about settler colonialism. There are very few academic concepts that have somehow jumped into the popular discourse like settler colonialism. But it's often used as a mantra. It's often used as kind of an accusation. See, Israel's a settler, to delegitimize it. But settler colonialism means something. It's a real important concept, and we have to understand what it really means. And it's a colonial system. The intention of the Zionist movement was to take over Palestine, to transform an Arab country into a Jewish country, transform Palestine into Israel. And so the answer to that is not negotiations. It's not conflict resolution. That's the part of the paradigm shift. We often talk about this as a conflict. See, in our language, we have to be careful in our language because we get locked in. A conflict is between two sides. There are no two sides here, as Miko said very appropriately. In a colonial situation, you don't have two sides. There's no fight between, and there's certainly no symmetry between the sides, right? The minute you say Israel and Zionism are a side to a conflict, you're legitimizing it. That's exactly why Israel wants you to see this as a conflict, because the minute we say conflict, we're legitimizing Israel and Zionism as a side. So that, and of course, the way you resolve a conflict is through compromise. Well, what exactly are we expecting the Palestinians to compromise on? You know, their patrimony over their own country, how many refugees can come back, what kinds of limitations to their cultural life or liberation are they allowed to get? In other words, the whole thing of conflict locks the Palestinians into a losing situation. We have to look at this as a settler colonial project of Zionism, but we also have to understand the logic of settler colonialism in order to get out of it. And settler colonialism imposes structures of domination and control over the country that it's taking over.
Jeff, 5 minutes.
Oh, wow. Well, okay, so in other words, it's not enough to simply try to negotiate an end to the conflict or what. You have to decolonize before you move on. Give me 2 minutes, okay? One of the problems is, is that settler colonialism also leaves legacies. The settlers, especially in Palestine, the settlers remain. One of the legacies is a nationalist legacy. In other words, there has been spawned over the last 75 to 100 years, a Zionist Israeli national identity. That's become a reality, whether or not we accept it and Palestinians do not accept. Here you get the dissonance, because part of decolonization is to say, no, Israelis are not a national group, because considering them a national group legitimizes the settler colonial project, right? It means that you succeeded in creating yourselves as a national. We don't accept that as a part of decolonization. But at the same time, that's a legacy. It exists. And how do we reconcile with that kind of a contradiction? Demography is another legacy. 40% of the population of whatever emerges post-colonial is going to be Israeli. How do we deal with that? And other forms of legacies. All right, I don't really have time to get into a lot of what I wanted to get into. There are different kinds of models for one state. Maybe we could talk about them in the questions and answers. Our one democratic state movement has a number of principles that we think are crucial. And I'll just mention them really quickly. We're talking about one democratic state, one constitution, one citizenship, one parliament. Everyone has equal rights. Of course, the return of the Palestinian refugees and their reintegration into society. Protection of individual rights, but also protection of collective rights. One of the things, again, that we have to accept as a part of the legacy is that there is a binational reality here. And so we have to plug in the fact that there are two national groups that are not only in conflict with each other, but will be in conflict with this new civil state, the constitutional state that we're trying to create. How do we deal with that conflict? And how do we then allow the emergence of a new civil society in a new, basically our task is to invent a new state. because you know, you have to be a citizen of a country that you belong to. And it has to be a country that everyone can belong to. It has to be a state which then provides space for the different national groups that are going to remain. But the task of the civil state is to constrain those national groups, because there's a natural conflict between national groups that want hegemony. And that's why nationalism in the end is a destructive force. It is not a constructive building force that builds just societies. So one of our tasks, and here we're going into the global part of it as well, is how does a civil state that offers citizenship, equal rights, a new civil identity to everyone, whatever the state is called. You know, Mandela said we're all South Africans. Well, we're not all anything. So we have a tougher task in Palestine, Israel, because we have to create a new civil identity and a new civil state. But that civil state has to be strong enough to control the nationalisms that it contains, that are going to try to overthrow it, to establish hegemony of their own, and as well, you know, fighting with each other for hegemony. So there's some real issues here that we have to deal with. Okay, all right, I'm gonna just end in one more thought that I mentioned, but that then goes into the regional part. Even if we get a civil state, you see, why these conflicts exist? Because we're trying to put liberation into a box, into a framework that's defined by Europeans that does not fit, that does not work, that generates conflict. So we have to think of a time, the Ottoman Empire was a time until 1908 or so, in which these things did not exist. How do we reconstruct a Middle East? And the Palestinians can be pioneers in helping to conceive of this idea. How do we create a new region without states, without nationalism? That's the only way in which peoples, religions, collectivities, ethnic groups, political groups, women, whatever, are going to actually be able to achieve genuine liberation. You cannot achieve liberation within the framework of a national state, of a nation state. And so these are just some of the issues we have to deal with. But I think the fact that people are beginning to think forward, that there are Palestinians and anti-Zionist Israelis that are trying to develop new models that have even wider implications, should give us some hope. And I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Jeff, for these very deep insights. It was also a very important contribution to understand the concept of one state solution in this conflict, or as Jeff said, we don't use this term conflict, we should use predicament or something else. But if you are interested to know more about Jeff's thoughts, I would encourage you also to buy his book, Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, Zionism, Settler Colonialism, and the Case for One Democratic State. So now is the time for some Q&As. So we won't have a long bandwidth for those, so please, if you have them ready, we can just choose, please, the lady over there. The mic will be coming.
Yes.
Please indicate your name, affiliation, and to whom the question is addressed.
My name is Sihan Fayyad. I'm Palestinian. Well, affiliation, just Palestinian. Okay, so I think it's a comment or two comments maybe, and one question. My first comment is usually when people talk about the conflict, they only consider two narratives, Israeli and Palestinian, which is faulted. Within Israeli community, within Palestinian community, there are multiple narratives. Even when envisioning a solution or ending of occupation, it's also different for different people within the one community. So just to put that outside. My question is for Jeff. If we're talking about a one state that is coherent, let's say, living together, yani what would be the connections? What would be the glue that holds this nation together? Would it even be called a nation? And an image came to my head. It's like putting, sorry for the expression, putting two animals in one room and trying to get babies out of these animals. Yeah, this is it.
Yeah, like I said, most countries are multinational, multi-ethnic. Anyways, you can answer, please. I'll take another one later.
Well, you know, I think there's a asymmetry in general as well, and that is that you know, I don't feel the hatred of Palestine. This isn't two animals in a common cage. For everything else, I don't feel a hatred of Palestinians towards Israelis. I think Netanyahu is trying to generate that, both by his attacks on Al-Aqsa and also by his killing of children and imprisoning children. Those, if anything, are triggers for triggering hatred. You know, I work on house demolitions. Palestinians will say, you know what, my house was demolished, it's unjust, it's just a part. But you know, there's a certain political context. We know what Israel wants to do. We know settler colonialism. We want to, you know, in a way, I can understand that. But when you kill my children, imprison my children, you know, attack my place of worship, that's something else. There's no justification. There's no political context, and that's what generates the hatred. On the Israeli side, I also don't feel there's hatred towards Palestinians. If anything, there's indifference. People just don't care about Arabs, as we call. They're invisible, and people don't care. Those are not great bases for for developing something together. But you know, Israel's not the first country. Palestine is not the first country, you know, to deal with intercommunal conflicts that everybody thought was irreconcilable. You know, the term that South Africa used before the end of apartheid was bloodbath. Everybody expected a bloodbath. You know, Northern Ireland, I mean, there's so many places in the world where these things have been overcome, especially by the younger generation. So I think what I'm saying is, if we can manage together, and even the process of sitting down together, Palestinians and Israelis, and thinking this through and planning it and advocating, and what you're saying, listening to all the multiple voices. I mean, this isn't the answer. This is just a draft, a beginning of a discussion. Bring in as many people participatory as possible. You know, and we're not going to get to an agreement, but we can get to a kind of a working vision of where we're going together. That process itself has brought us together. And then don't forget, the new country that's going to emerge is going to be a pretty good country in a sense. Geopolitically, it's very well placed. It has a strong economy. I think the Palestinians could achieve economic parity within a half a generation. You have a Palestinian diaspora that's very rich and educated that would kick in. So with a good economy, with people living together and so on, I think the hope is in the young generation. Let me just, there's good and bad things about the young generation.
We need to take more questions.
The bad thing about the young generation, I don't want to say bad, it's not true, is that they forget. And that's why you have museums. So but that's a good thing too. Young people move on. And I would predict that in this state, as controversial and difficult as it seems to us, Once you have a reality of a country in which we're all living and we can work together and live together, that has a good economy and equal rights and so on, I believe that that's the glue that in the end, you know, we still have to do a lot of work in terms of reconciliation, but I think the basis of a common life, you know, would be very strong, actually.
I'll take the lady there.
I have the mic, so can I ask the question?
No, sorry.
No, I raised the
I am the moderator. Thank you. Thank you. Next time, I know we have. I'm the moderator. You were the moderator before me.
Yeah,
I'm
but
sorry. So this is a trespassing. Please,
do
I'll
you
give you
follow
the next one.
Do you follow the rule, or it is just
the next one? I'll give it to you. But the lady is here.
Hi, my name is Noor. I'm a diaspora Palestinian, and this is just a comment directed at Jeff. So basically, it looks like Israel wants to establish some kind of confederation in the Middle East, you know, with this new map that Netanyahu presented. But Israel seeks to be like a ruling state. Like they want to rule over the Arabs, like a Pax Judaica. They want to establish some kind of Pax Judaica. And, you know, I feel like Israelis infantilize Palestinians. Like they feel like Palestinians can't rule themselves. And also Arabs as well. Like the West infantilizes Arabs. Arabs can't rule themselves. Democracy will not work for Arabs. But especially Palestinians, because all Arab peoples got liberation and they have states, except the Palestinians. And another thing, like, I don't think, I mean, you know, if Israel wasn't so genocidal and really showed a goodwill, I think that might be a possibility. But with what's going on right now and the intention of demolishing the Aqsa, I don't see any hope in the region. Okay, thank you.
Please, Miko, take this one. This was a comment, okay. Okay. Professor?
Yeah, so my question is to Miko. You said that these insurgents on 7th of October occupied the land and towns. So my question is linguistic, but it is with deep philosophical and political implication. Is the correct word occupied or claimed the land and towns? Okay. Now, the second one is the proposal of one state, democratic state. Now, in this scheme, do the Palestinians who have been displaced and who are in diaspora, do they have the right to return, number one? The second part of this question is, it seems to me that you begin with the assumption that the history of democracy is necessarily based on equal rights. There are 7 democracies in Europe which are also monarchies, and there is no equal rights there. Now, of course, after termination or elimination of the natives in Australia and even in the US, of course, there is a democratic state. But the point is, and it is not simply that they have equal rights. In some cases, they also have privileges. In America, in the reservation, there is a privilege. So I'm not entirely sure that this idea of one democratic state is really a solution, one that is really oriented to pursuing and attaining justice with a strong sense of morality and beauty.
Do you have another solution? Do you have a better solution?
So I'm just asking.
I'm saying, but I'm asking you back. Can you think of another solution? Because I can't. We have the certain constraints that exists within Palestine. there is this new creation of a new people, like Jeff was saying, the Israeli people. It's now, whether we like it or not, like the whites of South Africa, they're part of the demographics of Palestine. So we have that. We have two nations that have very high education levels, the ability to, they have some, to a certain extent, democratic traditions. I believe, like Jess was suggesting too, that this could be actually a very productive, well-functioning democracy very quickly, relatively speaking, particularly if we compare it to other areas of crisis that engage in reconciliation. So I don't really know that there is a third option. I mean, we either maintain apartheid and genocide, or we move towards democracy, equal rights. And as for the right of return, I don't think there's any question that mechanisms have to be put in place to allow the right of return to materialize. In other words, mechanisms have to be put in place immediately for the refugees, the Palestinians, to be able to return to their homes and then be paid reparations. But none of this, of course, is going to happen until apartheid collapses and we have a single democracy with equal rights. In many ways, I think people imagine that once apartheid collapses and there is a free democratic Palestine from the river to the sea, that we're done, we're home. The reality is that's not the reality. The reality is that is going to be the first time that actually we can solve the major issues like decolonization, like the right of return. And these are issues that have to be transformed from, I would say, from a bumper sticker to a reality. People say, yes, right of return, right of return. Well, mechanisms have to be put in place for millions of refugees, millions of Palestinians to return. Absolutely, that has to be done. It's not going to be done as long as there's an Israel. So I think that is absolutely a crucial part of that, a crucial element in the creation of a free Palestine from the river to the sea. As for the phrase I used, occupied, I wish I could say liberated, but it was short-lived. So they couldn't really liberate the parts of Palestine that they took because obviously they didn't have the means to do that. But they did take over and occupy those cities in that region for a while at least.
Thank you. A final question. So I'll take the gentleman here.
Thank you. My question will be for Miko also, Miko Peled. I would like to ask you about a paradox that I want to understand. I have been working with Palestinian local governments before, and I know that on the ground, many of the Western countries are helping development in West Bank and Gaza, like the French Development Agency, the United States USAID Agency, the German GIZ, and etc. But they are the same countries which are now acting as the enablers of this genocide. So they are basically letting Israel destroy what they have been building so far in Gaza and in West Bank. So how do you read this? Is it just hypocrisy or is it something else? Thank you.
No, it's hypocrisy without any question. The NGO industry in Palestine has been catastrophic. And Palestinians will admit this throughout all of Palestine, whether they're in the Naqab, the Bedouin Palestinian, or in the West Bank or everywhere else. Now, granted, like you said, the hypocrisy is that on the one side, on the one hand, they allow the occupying power, the source of the violence, to continue the violence, and then they provide aid. Well, keeping Palestinians poor and reliant on aid is precisely part of the problem. It's precisely part of the plan. Precisely part of the plan for Israel to continue to maintain power over the Palestinians. Now, Palestinians are not an impoverished people. There's no reason for Palestinians to be poor other than the fact that they are subjected to genocide and the apartheid, the economics of apartheid. But certainly that is part of the thing. You keep them poor, You make sure they can never, and by the way, all of these NGOs and the aid that comes from the NGOs is always tied in with, you must not support boycott, you must not support resistance, you must not be part of this, you must not say that. In other words, it's a silencing mechanism, at least as much as it is providing aid. Now, do Palestinians need aid? Yes. And it's very similar actually to the issue of UNRWA. They want to defund UNRWA? Fine. Defund UNRWA, but allow the refugees to return. Palestinians do not want to rely on UNRWA. And by the way, Ghassan Kanafani has written a great deal. Many of his short stories describe the tragic reality and the dependence on UNRWA. But fine, the world wants to defund UNRWA. I'm sure Palestinians would be fine if they were allowed to go back home. You know, we're talking about a very productive people who want to go home and go to work. So yes, it's not a paradox at all. The NGO mentality, the enslavement of Palestinians, keeping them poor and then providing a little bit of aid is precisely part of this reality that is so catastrophic. Absolutely.
All right. With these words, we're gonna close this session. So I hope you have enjoyed the discussions. We have been in a ride with first Dr. Hossam Zomlot, who gave us the international perspective and how this genocide that is taking place in Palestine right now, in Gaza, is being supported by many forces around the world, including the United States, and that there is an impunity happening, and that we must do everything at our disposal to end impunity now and impose a ceasefire and move to a more permanent settlement. And with us also, Miko Peled, he has given us some very interesting perspectives on how the condemnation of the resistance is actually very inadequate. Actually, it's the other way around that should be happening, which is the condemnation of the occupation and all the settler colonialist practices that are very derogatory to human rights in Palestine. And finally, we had a very fresh perspective from Jeff Halper, who gave us an insight on what a one-state solution could look like. And it's a triggering discussion for many people, because we were used for many decades to only hear about the two-state solutions, and we had the opportunity to have some insights on those. So I'm sure this is not the end of it, but at least it's a trigger for more discussions and broader deliberations on the issue. Thank you very much for your attendance today. Please, a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much.